Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto joined the marine to catch Luffy and there he fell in love with Nami? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Yellow Flash of Logatown. The air in Logatown tasted of salt, tar, and beginnings. It was a place of ghosts and dreams, where the ghost of the pirate king, Galdi Roger, still lingered on the sea breeze, and the dreams of 1,000 rookie crews set sail for the Grand Line. The cobblestone streets were a chaotic symphony of hurried footsteps, the shouts of merchants, and the brash laughter of pirates who thought themselves kings for a day. It was a town balanced on the edge of a knife, caught between the lawless ambition of the East Blue and the crushing reality of the world's most dangerous sea. And for Marine Captain Naruto Uzumaki, it was just another Tuesday. He stood on the rooftop of the Central Marine Barracks, a splash of stark white against the weathered gray slate. His standard-issue officer's coat, emblazoned with the kanji for justice on the back, was unbuttoned, flapping freely in the wind, revealing the simple black shirt and trousers he preferred beneath. He wasn't one for the rigid formality that defined so many of his colleagues. The coat was a necessity, a symbol, but the man within was something else entirely. His blonde hair, a shade brighter than the midday sun, was a beacon that other Marines had learned to look for in the chaos of battle. His eyes, a blue so deep they seemed to hold the sky itself, scanned the bustling plaza below with an unnerving calm. "They're getting bold," a voice grumbled beside him. Captain Smoker stood there, a thick, unlit cigar jutting from his lips, his own justice-emblazoned coat draped over his broad shoulders like a cape. His jeet, its tip crafted from seastone, rested against his back. Walking right past the barracks like they own the place. Every ship that docks spews out another dozen morons with skulls on their flags. Naruto didn't take his eyes off the crowd. He could feel them all, not just see them. It was an awareness that went beyond sight and sound, a unique energy signature for every living thing. It was a chaotic mess of emotions: hope, greed, fear, arrogance, a sea of tiny flames flickering in the city. He'd learned long ago to filter it, to focus on the ripples, the disturbances. "Let them," Naruto replied, his voice even and relaxed. "They're just guppies swimming toward a shark's mouth. The Grand Line will chew them up and spit them out before they even reach the Twin Capes." Smoker grunted, finally lighting his cigar and puffing a cloud of gray smoke that was instantly torn apart by the wind. "You're too calm about this, Uzumaki. This town is a powder keg. It was here they executed Roger. Every pirate who comes through thinks setting foot on that execution platform makes them a legend." Naruto's gaze drifted to the center of the plaza, where the wooden scaffold stood, stark and solemn. The place where a king's death had given birth to a great pirate era. He could feel the weight of that moment, a lingering echo in the energy of the town. "History has a long shadow," he mused. "But it's just a shadow. It can't hurt you. Tell that to the families of the people these pirates rob and kill," Smoker shot back, his voice a low growl. He respected Naruto, a respect earned not through rank but through action. The blonde captain had arrived under the personal sponsorship of Vice Admiral Garp a year ago, an outsider with no history in the Marines, yet he'd risen through E ranks with a speed that was nothing short of meteoric. They called him the Yellow Flash, a name whispered with awe by his own men and with fear by their enemies. One moment, a pirate ship was threatening a town; the next, its crew was bound and gagged on their own deck, their sails in tatters, with only a lingering golden blur as evidence of who had been there. "That's why we're here, Smoker," Naruto said, a faint smile touching his lips as he turned to face the other captain. "To stand between the shadows and the people who can't fight back." Before Smoker could retort, a young Marine, breathless and wide-eyed, scrambled onto the roof. "Captains, we've got a situation at the execution platform. It's Buggy the Clown," Smoker swore, crushing his cigar against the slate. "That damn circus freak. I thought we chased him out of here months ago." He turned, his lower body already dissolving into a column of smoke, ready for action. Naruto placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm. "Halting the Logia user's transformation. Easy. Let's not blow a hole in the town square until we know what's happening. Tashigi is down there, right? Smoker solidified, nodding curtly. She's leading the plaza patrol. Then let's see what she's dealing with before we go in like a cannonball. Naruto's calm was infectious, a steadying presence in the face of Smoker's fiery temperament. He gave a slight nod. Let's go. He didn't wait for Smoker. He simply stepped off the edge of the roof. For a heart-stopping second, the young Marine gasped, thinking his captain had just committed suicide. But Naruto didn't fall. He landed 3 stories below in the street with a whisper-soft thud, his knees barely bending to absorb the impact. He was a blur of white and gold as he moved, not running in a way that a normal human ran, but flowing through the panicked crowds like water parting around a stone. People scrambled out of his way, more from an instinctual sense of his passage than a conscious decision. By the time Smoker, billowing down as a pillar of smoke, had reformed in the plaza, Naruto was already there, standing at the edge of the cordon his Marines had formed. The scene was pure chaos. On the execution platform stood Buggy the Clown, his face painted in a grotesque grin, his ridiculously flamboyant pirate coat billowing around him. He had 2 of his crew members holding a struggling figure in place. A young man with a straw hat, his head and arms locked in a pillory. Below, a green-haired swordsman was locked in a furious battle with several of Buggy's underlings. 3 swords flashing in a whirlwind of steel. A blond man in a suit was delivering devastating kicks to another group, his movements a graceful, deadly dance. Naruto's eyes, however, weren't on the pirates. They were on the 2 figures trying to push through the Marine line. One was a boy with a long nose, looking absolutely terrified but holding a slingshot with trembling hands. The other was a young woman with vibrant orange hair, her face a mask of desperation and fury. "Get out of my way," she yelled, trying to shove past a young Marine who held his rifle nervously across his chest. "That's our captain up there. Ma'am, it's too dangerous. Please, stay back," the Marine pleaded. Naruto walked calmly toward her. His senses were screaming at him. The young man on the platform, his energy was bizarre. It felt like a compressed sun, wild and untamed, yet it held no malice. It was pure, unadulterated life force. And the green-haired swordsman's aura was like sharpened steel, a blade honed to a razor's edge. The man in the suit burned with a passionate, fiery energy. But it was the woman who drew his focus. Her energy was a complex storm of sharp intelligence, fierce loyalty, and a deep, aching sadness that was hidden beneath layers of anger and determination. "He's right," Naruto said, his voice cutting through her panicked shouts. The orange-haired woman spun around, her brown eyes flashing with fire. "And who are you?" "Captain Naruto Uzumaki, Marine." He gave her a disarming smile, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "And right now, this is a Marine operation. My men are just trying to keep civilians safe. I'm not a civilian, I'm his navigator," she retorted, jabbing a finger toward the platform. "And that idiot is about to get himself executed by a clown." Naruto's smile didn't falter. "A clown who has a sword to your captain's neck. Rushing in isn't going to help him." He could see the conflict in her eyes. The desperate urge to act warring with the cold, hard logic of his words. She clenched her fists, her knuckles white. "Then do something. You're the Marines. Aren't you supposed to stop this?" "We are," he said simply. His gaze flicked back to the platform. Buggy was monologuing now, his voice shrill and amplified by the unnatural acoustics of the plaza. He was gloating about his revenge, about executing the son of some man named Dragon right where the Pirate King had died. The name, Dragon, sent a ripple through the crowd and the assembled Marines, but Naruto's focus was elsewhere. The sky was darkening at an unnatural rate. The wind, once a steady sea breeze, was now whipping through the plaza in violent, unpredictable gusts. The energy he felt from the sky was wrong. It felt heavy, charged, like the air before a lightning strike, but magnified 1,000 times. "Smoker," Naruto called out without turning. "Forget Buggy. Get the civilians out of the plaza. Now." Smoker, who had been about to charge the platform, paused. "What, Uzumaki? The target is right there. The sky, you fool. Look at the sky." Everyone looked up. The clouds were a bruised, swirling purple-black, and they seemed to be descending, churning directly above the execution platform. A low, guttural rumble echoed, not like normal thunder, but something deeper, more primal. On the platform, the young man in the straw hat, Monkey D. Luffy, did something no one expected. He smiled. It wasn't a smile of fear or resignation. It was a wide, accepting, ear-to-ear grin. "Sorry guys," his voice carried across the sudden hush that had fallen over the plaza. "Looks like I'm dead." Buggy raised his sword, laughing maniacally. "Goodbye, Straw Hat," the orange-haired woman screamed, a raw, desperate sound. The swordsman and the cook redoubled their efforts, fighting with a new, frantic energy. Naruto moved. He wasn't a blur this time. He simply vanished. One moment he was standing beside the navigator, the next he was gone. He reappeared halfway to the platform in a flicker of gold. Then again at its base. He didn't bother with the stairs. He hit the wooden supports with one hand, a sphere of swirling blue energy materializing in his palm. Rasengan. The impact didn't create a massive explosion. It was a contained, grinding detonation of pure force. The entire right side of the scaffold splintered into nothingness, the structure groaning as it tilted precariously. Buggy and his men stumbled, their footing lost. But it was too late. Buggy, in his panic, had already brought the sword down. And then the world turned white. A bolt of lightning, thicker than the mast of a galleon, descended from the heavens. It didn't just strike the platform, it was the platform. It struck the metal lightning rod at its peak, traveled down its length, and engulfed the entire structure in a blinding, deafening cataclysm of raw, untamed power. The wood of the scaffold vaporized. The pillory restraining Luffy turned to ash. The shockwave threw everyone in the plaza off their feet. Naruto, already bracing himself, slid back several feet, his boots carving grooves in the cobblestones. The navigator was thrown back, and would have cracked her head on the street if the blonde cook hadn't twisted midair to catch her. Smoker had turned to smoke, the blast passing harmlessly through him. When the light faded, the execution platform was gone. Only a blackened, smoking crater remained. And standing in the middle of it, completely unharmed, covered in soot but grinning wider than ever, was Straw Hat Luffy. Buggy and his crew were scattered, unconscious and smoldering. A stunned silence fell over Logatown. The pirates, the civilians, the marines, everyone stared, mouths agape, at the impossible sight. Luffy just dusted off his hat, placed it back on his head, and laughed. "I'm alive." Naruto's mind was racing. That wasn't a normal lightning strike. He had felt it. The energy didn't just come from the sky, it felt like it had been called. It had a will, a purpose. It had focused on that single spot with an intelligence that nature didn't possess. Smoker was the first to recover. "Don't just stand there. He's a devil fruit user. He just got lucky. Apprehend him," he roared, surging forward as a torrent of smoke. The Straw Hat's crew, galvanized by their captain's impossible survival, sprang into action. "Luffy, this way," the navigator shouted, already running for the docks. The swordsman, Roronoa Zoro, and the cook, Sanji, fell in beside their captain, creating a path for his escape. They were a surprisingly effective unit. Zoro's 3 swords were a wall of steel, deflecting the marines' bullets and blades. Sanji's kicks were like cannonballs, sending soldiers flying. Luffy stretched his arm, his rubbery limb snagging a rooftoe, and slingshotting him over the heads of the crowd. Naruto's eyes narrowed. This was his mission. Garp's orders had been simple, if a bit unorthodox. "My idiot grandson is heading for the Grand Line. He's going to cause a tidal wave of trouble. I need someone who can keep up with him, someone who thinks outside the box. Go catch him, Naruto. And try not to destroy any islands while you're at it." He wasn't going to let them get away. Not this easily. He created 2 shadow clones without a single hand sign. They appeared in puffs of smoke, indistinguishable from the original. "One of you, help. With civilian evacuation and secure Buggy," he commanded. The clone nodded and blurred away. "You, run interference for Smoker. Don't let him level the town." The second clone gave a thumbs up and shish. OT off towards the cloud of smoke that was currently trying to ensnare Zoro. Naruto himself focused on the escape route. They were heading for the harbor. He took a breath, molding his energy. He flashed through a series of hand signs. A blur of motion, wind style. Great breakthrough. He exhaled a gale-force wind, not aimed at the pirates, but at the street ahead of them. The hurricane-like blasts, Chi kicked up a massive cloud of dust and debris, creating a temporary wall of zero visibility. He used the momentary confusion to move. He was a whisper, a flicker of gold weaving through the chaos. He appeared directly in the path of the fleeing navigator. Nami skidded to a halt, her eyes widening in shock as the blonde marine captain appeared before her as if from thin air. He wasn't even breathing hard. He just stood there, that same infuriatingly calm smile on his face. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his tone light, conversational. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of fighting, Sanji and Zoro holding off the other marines. Luffy was somewhere up on the rooftops, making a beeline for the port. She was their guide. She had to get to the ship. She gripped her 3-sectioned staff, holding it defensively. "Get out of my way." "I can't do that," Naruto said, his smile fading slightly, replaced by a look of genuine regret. "My job is to stop you. Your captain, there's more to him than meets the eye. The world government has a vested interest in him. He's not a monster," Nami shot back, her voice tight with conviction. "He's an idiot, but he's a good person. He saved my village." "I'm sure he did," Naruto conceded. "But he also declared war on the world by surviving that execution. People are going to be coming for him now. People far worse than a clown with a big nose or a marine captain who just wants to talk." A sudden gust of wind, stronger and more unnatural than Naruto's own jutsu, swept through the street. The rain began to fall, not a drizzle, but a torrential downpour, as if the sky had been ripped open. "What is this weather?" Nami muttered, shielding her eyes. Naruto's senses flared again. This was the same energy as the lightning, but diffused, blanketing the entire town. It was a storm, but it felt orchestrated. "A tool for escape. Nami, over here," Sanji's voice called out. He and Zoro were disengaging, using the sudden storm as cover. Nami saw her chance. She swung her staff, not at Naruto, but at a stack of barrels beside him. They splintered, spilling their contents, pickled fish, by the smell of it, all over the slick cobblestones. Naruto sidestepped the attack with casual grace. But the obstacle gave her the opening she needed. She darted past him, her feet sure on the slippery ground. He could have stopped her. A single touch and she would have been paralyzed by a nerve strike. A clone could have intercepted her. But he hesitated. For a fraction of a second, he hesitated. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the fierce, unwavering loyalty to her friends. It reminded him of home, of a time when he would have done the same for his own team. She glanced back as she ran, her orange hair plastered to her face by the rain, her eyes wide, with a mixture of fear and surprise that he wasn't pursuing her. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment across the rain-swept street. In that instant, he wasn't a marine and she wasn't a pirate. They were just two people on opposite sides of a storm. Then she was gone, swallowed by the downpour and the chaos. Naruto stood there for a moment, the rain soaking his white coat. One of his clones appeared beside him in a puff of smoke. "Buggy and his crew are secured, boss. Smoker is, well, he's being Smoker. Raging about them getting away." Naruto nodded, his gaze still fixed on the street where the navigator had disappeared. "Let him rage." He looked up at the sky, the unnatural storm already beginning to dissipate as quickly as it had arrived. Something else is at play here. This wasn't just a lucky escape. The primary clone, the one sent to help Smoker, dispelled itself. Its memories flooded Naruto's mind. He saw the Straw Hat Captain laughing as he bounced cannonballs away. He saw Zoro cutting through steel. He saw the cook's impossibly fast kicks. And he saw them all working together, a chaotic but fiercely loyal crew, escaping against impossible odds. He let out a slow breath, a small, wry smile on his face. Interesting, he thought. Very interesting. Vice Admiral Garp would not be pleased he'd let them slip through his fingers. But Naruto had a feeling this was only the beginning. His mission was to catch Monkey D. Luffy. But a new, unspoken objective was beginning to form in his mind. To understand the storm that surrounded him, and the fiery, orange-haired navigator at its center. Later, in the rain-washed quiet of his office, Naruto stood before a large map of the East Blue. A single Den Den Mushi sat on his desk, its eyes closed in sleep. He was waiting. He'd already filed his initial report. A masterwork of concise, factual information that managed to convey the sheer strangeness of the day's events without sounding insane. He'd mentioned the unnatural storm, Luffy's impossible survival, and the crew's surprising competence. He'd deliberately downplayed his own role in his brief encounter with the navigator. The Den Den Mushi suddenly clicked awake, its eyes snapping open. Kurapurupuru. Gotcha. Is that you, Naruto? The voice that boomed from the snail was loud enough to rattle the windows. It was overflowing with boisterous energy, the voice of Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp. Vice Admiral, Naruto said, his tone respectful but relaxed. Don't. Vice Admiral. Me. I read your report. They got away. My idiot grandson got away, right under your nose. There was a sound of loud crunching, Garp likely stress eating a bag of rice crackers. The situation was complicated, Naruto replied calmly. Buggy the Clown attempted a public execution. It drew a significant crowd. Then a localized, highly anomalous weather event occurred at the precise moment of execution. Anomalous weather? You mean a storm? Garp scoffed. The Grand Line is full of anomalous weather. That's no excuse. With respect, sir, this was different. I've never felt anything like it. It was like the storm itself chose to save him. Naruto paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He knew Garp, for all his bluster, was a shrewd man. He was saved by a bolt of lightning that vaporized the execution platform but left him without a scratch. The crunching on the other end of the line stopped. There was a long silence, filled only with the faint crackle of the connection. Lightning, you say? Garp's voice was quieter now, laced with something Naruto couldn't quite identify. Annoyance. Pride. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Of course he was. That's my grandson for you. The boy's got the luck of the devil himself. Naruto blinked, surprised by the sudden shift. Sir, don't worry about it, Naruto. So, what's your assessment of the crew? Naruto turned his gaze back to the map. He thought of the swordsman's unyielding discipline, the cook's fiery passion, the sniper's terrified bravery, the navigator's fierce intelligence, and the captain's overwhelming, infectious spirit. They're not typical pirates, he said. They're chaotic and undisciplined, but they're loyal to each other. And they're far more powerful than their current bounties suggest. The swordsman, Roronoa Zoro, is worth more than the 20 million berry bounty on his head after his run-in with Baroque Works. The captain, Monkey D. Luffy, his potential is immeasurable. He has a quality that draws people to him. He gets that from his father, Garp grumbled, a flash of irritation in his voice. Anything else? Naruto hesitated for a moment. The navigator. She's the brain of the operation. She kept them focused during the escape. Without her, they would have been scattered and captured. He remembered her eyes, the fire in them. She's the one holding them together. HMPH. A good crew needs a good navigator, Garp stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. So, they're heading for Reverse Mountain now. The entrance to the Grand Line. What are you going to do, Captain? Naruto's eyes traced the path from Logatown to the towering mountain that marked the end of the Four Blues. A plan was already forming in his mind, a strategy based not on brute force, but on speed and precision. Smoker can lock down the normal route. He's determined enough for that, Naruto said. But I don't think they'll take the normal route. They're unpredictable. I'll take my own ship, the Swift Justice. We'll cut them off at the pass. I'll be waiting for them on the other side. There was another long pause from Garp. Then, a slow, rumbling chuckle. Good. That's why I chose you, Naruto. You don't just follow the storm, you predict where it's going to strike. Don't fail me. The world government is already making noise about this. The five elders have heard about the D in his name. Naruto felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. The five elders. The highest authority in the world. For them to be interested in a rookie pirate from the East Blue, Luffy was more important than even Garp had let on. I understand, sir, Naruto said, his voice now cold steel. I will not fail. See that you don't. Gotcha. The line went dead. The Den Den Mushi closed its eyes and went back to sleep. Naruto stood alone in the quiet office, the scent of rain and ozone still hanging in the air. His mission was clear. Pursue the Straw Hat Pirates. Apprehend Monkey D. Luffy. But as he stared at the map, his mind kept drifting back to a rain-swept street, to a flash of orange hair and a pair of defiant brown eyes. The mission had just become significantly more complicated. Unseen, miles away in the sterile, white marble halls of Mary Geoise, a report clattered onto a polished desk. A shadowed figure, clad in the pristine white and gold robes of a cipher pole agent, stood at attention. The report from Logatown, Grand Inquisitor Valerius, the agent said, his voice devoid of emotion. A slender, gloved hand reached out and picked up the paper. The figure behind the desk was hidden in shadow, only his silhouette visible against the grand window that overlooked the world. Anomalous atmospheric phenomena, unprecedented energy signature, coincides with the escape of the pirate, Monkey D. Luffy. The voice was smooth as silk, yet carried an undercurrent of immense, ancient power. It was a voice that did not tolerate failure or imperfection. The sensors we placed in the East Blue registered the spike. It bears the same chaotic signature as the event in the O'Hara sector years ago. And the incident at God Valley. The signature of heresy. The figure stood, stepping into a sliver of light. He was unnaturally tall and thin, his face sharp and aristocratic, with eyes that glowed with a faint golden light. This was Grand Inquisitor Valerius, the head of the Celestial Dragon's clandestine task force, the Hand of God. His purpose was not to enforce the law of men, but the law of the divine. It seems a new variable has entered the equation, Valerius mused, his golden eyes scanning the report. And there is another name here, a marine captain. Naruto Uzumaki. His presence is also an anomaly. Keep a file on him. Yes, my lord. Valerius looked out the window, his gaze seeming to pierce the very fabric of the world, staring down at the distant seas below. The age of pirates is a symptom of a greater disease. A sickness of chaos and free will that plagues this world. This, Monkey D. Luffy, is a nexus of that chaos. And this marine, Uzumaki, he feels different. We will watch them both. His voice dropped to a near whisper, a sound of chilling, absolute conviction. The heretics will be purged. The world will be brought to order. The age of men will end. And the age of true justice will begin. The storm in Logatown had passed, but a far greater one was just beginning to brew. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Calm and the Serpent. The swift Jew. Stice cut through the waters of the Grand Line like a scalpel. It was a vessel built for speed and stealth, a prototype frigate smaller than a standard marine battleship, its hull painted a deep ocean blue that blended with the waves under anything but the harshest sunlight. There were no broadside cannons, only a single, long-range forward cannon and several rotating turrets armed with seastone-tipped harpoons. It was a hunter, not a brawler, a reflection of its captain. Naruto stood on the prow, the wind whipping through his hair, his unbuttoned coat a stark white banner against the impossibly blue sky. The air here was different. It hummed with a wild, untamed energy that the Four Blues lacked. Islands of winter existed a day's sail from islands of perpetual summer. The weather changed with the whims of a drunken god, and the sea itself was alive with monsters that defied imagination. He loved it. It felt more real, more alive, than any place he had ever been. You're enjoying this. The voice was dry, laced with a familiar, weary intelligence. Naruto turned, a grin spreading across his face. Shikamaru Naru leaned against the foremast, his standard marine uniform looking as rumpled and uncomfortable as ever. He had his hands shoved in his pockets, his dark hair pulled back in its customary ponytail, and an expression of profound boredom on his face. He was Naruto's first and only choice for a second in command. Where Naruto was instinct and action, Shikamaru was logic and strategy, the perfect anchor for the Yellow Flash's storm. What's not to enjoy? Naruto asked, gesturing to the endless expanse of water. Fresh air, a new adventure, a mission from the hero of the Marines himself. It's better than filling out paperwork back at HQ. Chasing your sponsor's runaway grandson into the most dangerous sea in the world is not my idea of better than paperwork, Shikamaru grumbled. It's a drag, and according to your report, this runaway has the heavens themselves intervening on his behalf. How troublesome. Naruto laughed. You read the report. I had to read it 3 times to make sure you hadn't been drinking, Shikamaru said, walking to stand beside him at the railing. Lightning from a clear sky. A storm that appeared and vanished in minutes. It's illogical. Weather on the Grand Line is unpredictable, but it's not sentient. That's what it felt like, Naruto said, his expression turning serious. He looked down at the waves, his gaze distant. It felt like the world itself wanted him to escape. He flexed his hand, remembering the feeling of the charged air, the sheer, overwhelming will behind the storm. It was a power he recognized, though he couldn't place it. A power akin to nature energy, but wilder, untamed. And the crew? Shikamaru asked, shifting topics. A pirate hunter who uses 3 swords, a chef from the Baroque, a terrified liar with a slingshot, and a cat burglar who famously hates pirates. It's not a crew, it's the setup to a bad joke. They work, though, Naruto countered. They fought together. There's a bond there, especially with the navigator. His mind flashed back to her face, the desperation and defiance in her eyes. She's the one I don't understand. You looked into her, right? Shikamaru sighed, the sound of a man burdened by the foolish requests of his superiors. Nami, the cat burglar. Orphaned in the Oiko kingdom. Adopted by a former marine named Belmir. Her village, Kokoyashi, was subjugated for 8 years by the fish-man pirate Arlong. She was forced to work as his cartographer, under the belief that if she collected 100 million berry, he would free her home. Naruto's hands tightened on the railing. He'd read the reports on Arlong. A brutal, species supremacist who had terrorized the East Blue for years. Enabled by a corrupt marine captain. The reports say Arlong was defeated and his park was destroyed, Shikamaru continued, watching his friend's reaction. Around the same time a CERTAIN pirate crew with a captain in a straw hat was seen in the area. Shortly after, Nami's official marine record shows her joining that very same crew. Draw your own conclusions. So that was it. The fierce loyalty. Luffy hadn't just saved a village, he had saved her village. He had freed her from a decade of servitude and despair. Her loyalty wasn't born of adventure or greed, it was forged in liberation. It made her more dangerous, more committed, than any of the others. It's still illogical, Shikamaru stated flatly. To go from hating pirates to becoming one, all for the sake of one man, it's inefficient. Troublesome. Sometimes the most illogical choices are the only ones that make sense, Naruto said quietly. He glanced at Shikamaru. We're taking a shortcut. Set a course for the calm belt. Shikamaru's perpetually bored eyes widened for a fraction of a second. The calm belt. Are you insane? That's a breeding ground for sea kings. The ship has no paddles, and the wind doesn't blow. It's a suicide run. The wind isn't a problem for me, Naruto said, a mischievous glint in his eye. And as for the Sea Kings, just tell the crew to stay below deck and not make any sudden noises. He was going to get them through the nest of the world's largest predators by asking them to be quiet. Shikamaru sighed again, long and deep. It was going to be a very, very troublesome mission. The Going Merry crested the final waterfall of Reverse Mountain and shot out into the Grand Line like a cork from a bottle. The landing was less of a landing and more of a controlled crash, a jerry-ing slam that sent Usopp and Luffy tumbling across the deck. They came to a stop in a churning patch of sea, the strange, cross-shaped mountain looming behind them. Nami clung to the railing, her heart still pounding in her chest from the terrifying ascent. Her knuckles were white, but a thrill of victory coursed through her. They'd done it. They had actually entered the Grand Line. We did it, Luffy yelled, bouncing back to his feet with his signature, infectious grin. The Grand Line. Adventure. Don't celebrate yet, you idiot. Nami snapped, her voice sharp with adrenaline. She pointed a trembling finger ahead. A shadow was falling over their ship, a shadow so vast it blotted out the sun. What is that? A whale, larger than any mountain she had ever seen, loomed before them, its single, mournful eye bigger than their entire ship. Its skin was a network of scars, and a low, soul-shaking moan emanated from it, a sound of pure, unending grief. What followed was a sequence of events that Nami was beginning to accept as normal for her life. Luffy, in his infinite wisdom, punched the whale in the eye. The whale, in its understandable anger, tried to swallow them. They were saved by an old man with flower-shaped hair who lived inside the whale, and they ended up having tea in its stomach while the old man, Crocus, explained that the whale, Laboon, was waiting for a pirate crew tea. Hat had promised to return for him 50 years ago. It was insane. It was ridiculous. And it was, in a strange way, beautiful. Luffy ended his visit by picking a fight with Laboon, a fight that ended not in victory or defeat, but in a promise. He painted the Straw Hat Jolly Roger on Laboon's scarred head, a symbol of their new vow. He would return for Laboon after they had conquered the Grand Line. He gave the grieving giant a new reason to live. As they finally sailed away, with Crocus having given them a log pose to guide them to the next island, Nami stood at the stern, watching the massive whale fade into the distance. She felt Sanji step up beside her, a cool drink in his hand. "For my beautiful Nami Swan, to calm your adventurous heart," he said with a suave, swirling flourish. She took the glass, the cool condensation a welcome sensation against her skin. "Thanks, Sanji." Her mind wasn't on the drink, or even on the giant whale. It was on the last port they'd left behind. "Were you guys, I mean, in Logatown, weren't you scared?" Sanji lit a cigarette, the smoke instantly snatched away by the sea breeze. Of course. A man who isn't scared in a situation like that is either a fool or a liar. His gaze drifted to Zoro, who was arguing with Luffy about who had won the fight with Laboon. "But we had to get our captain back. There was no other choice. It wasn't just that clown," Nami said, her voice dropping lower. "It was that marine, the one with the blonde hair." Sanji's easy-going demeanor hardened slightly. "Ah, the Yellow Flash. I've heard the name. Fast as lightning and hits like a cannonball. He was the one who appeared in front of you, wasn't he?" Nami nodded, taking a sip of her drink. "He just appeared. One second the street was empty, the next he was there. He wasn't like that smoker guy, all angry and yelling about justice. He was calm. He smiled. But his eyes, it felt like he could see right through me." She shivered, and it wasn't from the cold. "He could have stopped me. I know he could have. But he didn't." "Maybe he was mesmerized by your beauty," Sanji suggested, ever the charmer. "No, it wasn't that," she said, shaking her head. "It was something else. A flicker of understanding, regret." She couldn't place it. He was an enemy, a marine tasked with their capture, but for a split second, he hadn't felt like one. It was that feeling, more than his incredible speed, that unsettled her. "He's different. And I have a bad feeling we'll be seeing him again soon." The Swift Justice lay anchored in a quiet cove, hidden from the main currents flowing from Reverse Mountain. They had made the journey through the calm belt in record time. The trip had been unnerving. For hours, the ship had moved through dead calm water under an unnaturally quiet sky, propelled by a steady, controlled wind that Naruto generated from the deck. The only sounds were the creaking of the ship and the occasional, house-sized shadow that would pass beneath them in the deep. Naruto had simply stood at the prow, his hand outstretched, a thin layer of his energy blanketing the ship, masking their presence from the leviathans below. He had made them invisible to the monsters of the deep. The crew now looked at their captain with a new level of awe and terror. Shikamaru stood beside him on the deck, a spyglass to his eye. "A ship is exiting the channel. Small, caravel style, a sheep for a figurehead. It's the Going Merry." Naruto nodded. "Log pose will point them to Whiskey Peak. That's their first stop. It's a known haven for bounty hunters," Shikamaru said. "The whole town is a front for an organization called Baroque Works. They lure in rookie pirates with promises of a party, get them drunk, and then capture them for their bounties. It's a classic honey trap." "Perfect," Naruto said with a smile. "Let them do the work of separating the wheat from the chaff. We're not going in with cannons blazing. I'm going in alone." "Alone, Captain? That's reckless," Shikamaru argued, lowering the spyglass. "We have no idea of the true strength of Baroque Works on that island." "I'm not going to fight a whole town," Naruto replied, stretching his arms. "I'm going to observe, and I want to talk to someone. Get the ship into a stealth position a mile offshore. Wait for my signal." Before Shikamaru could protest further, Naruto blurred. He was gone from the deck, leaving behind only a faint shimmer in the air. He was already moving across the surface of the water, his feet kicking up tiny puffs of spray as he ran towards the distant, cactus-shaped island of Whiskey Peak. The party was in full swing. The people of Whiskey Peak had welcomed the Straw Hats with open arms, hailing them as heroes. Food was piled high on long tables, and music filled the streets. Luffy was engaged in an eating contest with the entire town. Zoro was in a drinking contest with a dozen burly men who called themselves local heroes, and Usopp was telling wildly exaggerated tales of his bravery to a crowd of adoring women. Only Nami was immune to the charm. She sat at a table with the town's mayor, a man named Garp, nursing a single drink and forcing a smile. It was all too perfect. Pirates were feared and hated, not welcomed with a feast. Her years of deception and survival had honed her instincts, and they were screaming that this was a trap. Making an excuse about needing some fresh air, she slipped away from the main plaza, moving silently down a side alley, her hand resting on the three-sectioned staff Usopp had built for her. The cheerful music of the party faded behind her, replaced by the quiet hum of the desert night. The buildings here were made of sandstone, carved to look like giant cacti, and the moonlight cast long, strange shadows. She was so focused on her surroundings, on the feeling of being watched, that she didn't sense him until he spoke. "I told you we'd see each other again." Nami's heart leapt into her throat. She spun around, her staff held at the ready. Leaning against the wall of the alley, arms crossed over his chest, was Marine Captain Naruto Uzumaki. He was out of his white justice coat, dressed in his simple black shirt and trousers, which somehow made him seem even more dangerous. He looked utterly relaxed, as if he were merely out for an evening stroll. "How did you get here?" she demanded, her voice a harsh whisper. "I took a shortcut," he said with that same easy smile. "You should be more careful. This town isn't what it seems. These people aren't friendly locals, they're bounty hunters. The whole party is a ruse to get you drunk and capture you." Nami's eyes narrowed. "And I should trust a marine. You're here to do the exact same thing." "True," he conceded, pushing himself off the wall and taking a slow step forward. She tensed, but he stopped a respectful distance away. "But I'm not going to lie to you about it. And I'm not interested in your crew. I'm only here for him. For Monkey D. Luffy. You're not taking him," she said, her grip tightening on her staff. "Why?" Naruto asked, his tone genuinely curious. "I've read your file, Nami. I know what Arlong did to you. To your home. I know you despise pirates more than anyone. So why are you protecting a boy who's just as reckless and destructive as the man who enslaved you?" His words hit her like a physical blow. Hearing her past laid bare by her enemy, by this man who radiated a power she couldn't comprehend, was deeply unsettling. "You don't know anything about him," she shot back, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "Luffy is not like Arlong. He's not cruel. He's not greedy. He set me free. And for that, you owe him your life. You're willing to throw away your freedom, to become the very thing you hate, for him." Naruto's gaze was intense, searching. It wasn't an interrogation. It felt like he was genuinely trying to solve a puzzle. "There's another way. Help me take him in. I can guarantee you and the rest of your friends walk away. A full pardon. You can go back to your village, live a normal life. Isn't that what you want?" The offer hung in the air between them, tempting and poisonous. A life without running. A life of peace. Everything she had fought for so long. All she had to do was betray the boy who had given her back her life. Her answer was a low, dangerous growl. "Go to hell." Naruto's smile returned, but this time it was different. It was tinged with respect. "I thought you might say that." Before he could continue, the night erupted. A scream tore rough the air from the direction of the party, followed by the clash of steel and a guttural war cry that could only belong to Zoro. The bounty hunters of Whiskey Peak had sprung their trap. An explosion from a nearby rooftop rocked the alley, sending a shower of sandstone and dust down on them. Naruto instinctively moved, grabbing Nami by the arm and pulling her into a recessed doorway, shielding her with his own body as debris rained down. For a moment, they were pressed close together, the chaos of the town a distant roar. She could feel the warmth of his body, the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart. He was strong, solid, a bastion against the violence outside. It was a confusing, terrifying sensation. He released her as the dust settled. "Looks like the party's over," he said, his eyes already scanning the rooftops. His entire demeanor shifting from conversational to predatory. "Stay here if you want to be safe," he blurred, vanishing from the alley. Nami stood there for a heartbeat, her mind reeling from his offer. From his proximity. Then her own resolve hardened. Her crew was in trouble. Luffy was in danger. She wasn't going to hide. She ran out of the alley, back toward the fight. The plaza was a war zone. Zoro, completely sober and grinning like a demon, was fighting 100 bounty hunters at once, his 3 swords a whirlwind of death. Baroque Works agents, led by the bomb-wielding Mr. 5 and the weight-changing Miss Valentine, had appeared to handle the situation. Naruto moved through the chaos like a ghost. He saw Luffy, passed out near the food table, completely oblivious. This was his chance. He flickered forward, his hand outstretched to grab the rubber boy. Fog bank. Tempo. A thick, unnaturally dense fog suddenly erupted from the ground between Naruto and Luffy. It was disorienting, clinging, and utterly blinding. Naruto paused, his senses reaching out through the mist. He pinpointed Nami on a nearby rooftop, her klima tacked held aloft. She had used her knowledge of weather to create a diversion. It was clever. It wouldn't hold him for long, but it was clever. 2 figures shot out of the fog towards him. Not bounty hunters. They were clones of himself. The boss is busy, one of them said with a grin. Your fight is with us. Zoro, having dispatched the last of the small fry bounty hunters, turned his attention to the real threat. He saw the 2 identical blonde men and his eyes lit up with a feral excitement. 2 of you. This just got interesting. He charged, and the clones met him head-on. The sound of their clash was like a thunderclap. Zoro was astounded. They were solid. They fought with the same speed and strength as the original, their coordination perfect. It was like fighting 2 masters at once. The real Naruto bypassed the fog in an instant, appearing beside the sleeping Luffy. He was about to grab him when a booming voice echoed across the plaza. Gum gum. Sleepy time hammer. Luffy, still mostly asleep, had instinctively lashed out, his inflated fist swinging wildly and slamming into Naruto's side. The blow was surprisingly powerful, but Naruto took it without flinching, sliding a few feet back. Luffy sat up, rubbing his eyes. Food, fight, he mumbled, before his eyes focused on the blonde marine. A flicker of recognition sparked in his sleepy brain. Oh, it's you, the fast guy. Let's fight. Naruto sighed. So much for a quiet extraction. This entire island was descending into a farce. He had the intel he needed. He had confirmed Nami's loyalty and the crew's fighting prowess. He knew their log pose would now point them towards Little Garden. A protracted battle here, with 2 of the Straw Hat's main fighters and 100 bounty hunters, was a drag. He made a single hand sign. The 2 clones F.I.G.H.T.I.N.G. Zoro exploded into puffs of smoke, the sudden dispersal causing the swordsman to stumble forward in surprise. Naruto then clapped his hands together. Wind style. Dust cloud jutsu. He exhaled a massive, spiraling vortex of wind that kicked up every loose bit of sand, dust, and debris in the plaza. It was a sandstorm in a bottle, a complete sensory blackout. When it finally cleared moments later, Naruto Uzumaki was gone. The Straw Hats were left alone in the ruined plaza with 100 unconscious bounty hunters and 2 very confused Baroque Works agents. A mile offshore, Naruto landed silently on the deck of the Swift Justice. Shikamaru was waiting, a game of shogi set up on a crate. That looked troublesome, he commented without looking up. Any progress? Naruto walked to the rail, looking back at the distant lights of Whiskey Peak. He could still feel her energy signature, a flickering flame of defiance and intelligence. They're heading to Little Garden next. And I think I'm starting to understand the navigator. Shikamaru moved a piece on the board. And what's that? She's not following a pirate, Naruto said, a thoughtful expression on his face. She's following a promise of freedom, and she'll fight anyone who tries to get in the way of that. He turned to his friend. And that makes her more dangerous, and more interesting, than any pirate on the sea. Check, Shikamaru thought, as he looked at his captain. This mission was becoming far more complicated than a simple capture. It was becoming a matter of ideology. A matter of the heart. And those were always the most troublesome. Deep in the Grand Line, in the desert kingdom of Alabasta, a Den Mushi on the desk of Mr. 0, the warlord crocodile, rang. A subordinate agent from Whiskey Peak was giving a panicked report. The bounty hunters were defeated by Roronoa Zoro, but the real issue, sir, was the Marine. They called him the Yellow Flash. He created solid copies of himself, moved faster than the eye could see, and used techniques that weren't in any known Marine fighting style. He wasn't there for us. He was after Straw Hat. Crocodile listened, a plume of smoke curling up from his cigar. A super-powered Marine outside the normal chain of command, hunting a rookie pirate. This information was useful. He had his own channels. Information of this nature had a high price in the right circles. Circles that reached all the way to the top. To the gods of the world themselves. The file on Naruto Uzumaki was about to get a significant update. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. A Duel of Giants and Wills. The air on Little Garden was thick and heavy, smelling of damp earth, exotic blossoms, and ancient blood. It was a place untouched by time, a lost world where the roars of Prius. Tauric beasts echoed through jungles of impossible scale. Trees towered like skyscrapers, their canopies forming a second sky, and ferns the size of houses carpeted the forest floor. For the Straw Hat Pirates, it was another island of wonders and terrors. For Nami, it was a navigational nightmare. The log pose is still pointing to this island, she said, staring at the wristband with a frown. They had been moored in a secluded river inlet for an hour, the jungle pressing in on all sides, a wall of menacing green. But it hasn't reset. It should have reset by now. Something's wrong. Luffy, of course, was already gone. The moment the ship had anchored, he and the newly joined Princess Vivi of Alabasta had declared it an exploration adventure, and vanished into the trees, followed closely by Vivi's duck, Karoo. Probably getting eaten by a dinosaur, Zoro muttered from his napping spot against the mast. Don't joke about that, Usopp shrieked, peering nervously into the dense foliage. I have a disease. It's called, can't go on prehistoric islands or I'll die, disease. It's very serious. Nami ignored them both, her mind focused on the puzzle of the log pose. This island was a single landmass. There was no reason for the log to take a year to reset, which is what the old man Crocus had warned might happen. Unless the magnetic fields here were so bizarre, so ancient and powerful, that they dwarfed a normal island's signature. A deafening roar, closer this time, shook the very planks of the Going Merry. Usopp let out a yelp and scrambled up the rigging. Nami's hand went instinctively to her klima tact. This place felt wrong. It felt like they were trespassing in a land that did not belong to men. I'm staying right here, she declared. Someone has to guard the ship from giant, carnivorous lizards. Good idea, Zoro said without opening his eyes. Wake me when it's time to leave. Nami sighed. This was her crew. A narcoleptic swordsman, a pathological liar, a captain with the survival instincts of a lemming. Sometimes, she felt less like a navigator and more like a daycare teacher. She paced the deck, the oppressive humidity making her clothes stick to her skin. The silence between the roars was somehow worse, filled with the clicks, buzzes, and slithers of a million unseen things. It was during one of these lulls that she heard it. Not a roar, or a screech, but a deep, booming laugh. It sounded like a mountain chuckling. It came from deep within the jungle, followed by an equally titanic voice shouting a challenge. Then came a sound like two continents colliding. A tremor that vibrated up through the ship's hull. Usopp nearly fell from his perch. What was that? It sounded like fighting, Nami said, her eyes wide. But who, or what, on this island could make a sound like that? Her question was answered a few minutes later when a figure emerged from the jungle near the riverbank. He was a giant, not just a large man, but a true giant out of myth and legend. Clad in Viking-esque armor, with a wild beard and a horned helmet. He was laughing, a flagon of ale clutched in one hand. He saw their ship, and his laughter grew. Gag-yag-yag-yag-ya. Well now, what have we here? Little flies in my soup. Been a long time since we've had visitors. Usopp fainted. Nami just stared, her mind struggling to process the scale of the man before her. This was Brigi, the Red Ogre. A legendary giant pirate warrior whose bounty poster she'd seen once in a book, a poster that was over 100 years old. He was surprisingly gentle, he explained. After Usopp was revived with smelling salts and the promise of a quick and painless death, that he and his comrade, Dory the Blue Ogre, had been locked in a duel for the past 100 years on this very island. The tremors they felt were the daily clashes of their weapons. They were fighting over the honor of their respective hunting kills, a meaningless squabble that had become the sole purpose of their existence. Every time the central volcano erupted, they would meet in the middle of the island and fight to the death. A fight that, for a century, had always ended in a draw. Meanwhile, deep in the jungle, Luffy and Vivi were having a similar encounter with the other giant, Dory, who shared the same story with a hearty, Gebabababa laugh. Luffy, ever one to respect a man's conviction, instantly declared the giants to be his new friends. Back on the ship, Nami found herself in a surreal situation, sharing tea with a 100-foot-tall Viking. Brigitte was fascinated by their small world, and Nami, despite her fear, found herself drawn into his tale. A century of unwavering commitment to a code of honor. It was foolish, it was absurd, but it was also magnificent. It was the kind of absolute, idiotic conviction that reminded her, unnervingly, of her own captain. She was so engrossed in the giant's story that she didn't notice the second visitor until he was already on her ship. There was no sound, no splash of water, no creak of a rope. One moment, the deck behind her was empty. The next, Naruto Uzumaki was standing there, leaning against the railing as if he'd been there all day. Nami's blood ran cold. She jumped to her feet, her staff snapping into her hand. Usopp, who had just been starting to relax, took one look at the blonde marine and fainted again. Brigitte squinted down at the newcomer. "Ho, another little man. You were a quiet one." Naruto didn't even look at the giant. His blue eyes were fixed on Nami, a calm, unreadable expression on his face. "We need to stop meeting like this," he said. His voice barely audible over the hum of the jungle. "People will start to talk." "What do you want?" Nami demanded, her heart hammering against her ribs. How did he keep doing that? Finding them in the middle of nowhere, appearing like a ghost. Was he tracking them? Was there something on their ship? "A conversation," he said simply. He held up his hands, showing they were empty. He wasn't wearing his marine coat today, just the simple black attire. He looked less like a soldier and more like a traveler. A very, very dangerous traveler. "No tricks, no traps. I just want to talk." He took a step forward, and she took a step back. "Stay where you are." He stopped, respecting her boundary. "This island," he said, gesturing to the oppressive jungle around them. "It's a remnant of the past. A place where things that should be dead and gone still live. A fitting place for a duel a century old, don't you think?" He looked up at Brigitte. To fight for 100 years over a simple argument. Some would call it honorable. Others would call it a waste. His gaze returned to her. "Which is it, Nami? Is your captain's quest honorable, or is it a waste? 100-year duel ends in death. A quest to become Pirate King, it ends the same way. On a scaffold, just like in Logatown." "You don't know what you're talking about," she retorted, her voice shaking slightly. "Don't I?" He took another slow step. "I know that you're the smartest person on this crew. You're a brilliant navigator, a keen observer. You see the patterns. You know the odds. And you know, logically, that this path, it only leads to one of two places, a marine prison like Impel Down, or the bottom of the sea." He was doing it again. Cutting through her defenses with simple, undeniable logic. He wasn't yelling about justice or threatening her with arrest. He was talking to her like an equal, like someone whose intellect he respected, and that was far more disarming. "He saved my home," she said. The words her anchor in a sea of doubt. "And you think that makes him invincible?" Naruto countered, his voice gentle but firm. Arlong was a big fish in a small pond. Out here, he was nothing. Here there are warlords of the sea, marine admirals, emperors. Beings with the power to destroy islands with a single attack. I've seen them. I've fought them. Your captain's rubber body and strong will won't be enough." He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a rolled-up scroll. He tossed it, and it landed softly on the deck between them. "What is it?" she asked, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "A gift, or a warning. It's a series of sea charts for the first half of the Grand Line. Not the forgeries they sell to pirates, but marine-grade charts. They show the established safe routes, the locations of marine bases, the known territories of the emperors, and, the anomalous weather patterns that can erase a ship from existence in a heartbeat. She stared at the scroll as if it were a snake. A tool of immense value. A tool that could save their lives a dozen times over. A tool offered by their mortal enemy. Why? She whispered. Because I don't want to see you die, he said. And the simple honesty in his voice stunned her into silence. I don't want to fish your ship out of the wreckage after you've stumbled into the territory of a man like Kaido or Big Mom. I want you to understand the world you're sailing into. And I want you to make a choice. He met her gaze, his blue eyes holding an unexpected depth, a flicker of something that looked like empathy. I told you before, help me bring him in. I can still guarantee your freedom. You can take these charts and sail anywhere you want, live any life you want. You don't have to tie your fate to his. This was his strategy, not force, but temptation, not chains, but the offer of a different kind of freedom. He was trying to recruit her, to turn her. He was appealing to the part of her that was a survivor. The part that had schemed and stolen for 8 years. He was appealing to the woman she used to be. Before she could find her voice, the central volcano of Little Garden erupted with a mighty roar, spewing a plume of black smoke into the sky. Brigitte stood up, his expression turning grim. It is time, the giant boomed. The signal for our daily battle. He picked up his massive axe and shield. He looked down at Nami, then at Naruto. The little man makes a good point, little fly. Honor is a heavy shield to carry. He then turned and marched into the jungle, his footsteps shaking the ground. The moment was broken. Nami looked from the departing giant to the scroll on the deck, then back to Naruto. His offer still hung in the air, a tangible thing. And then Dory's scream of agony ripped through the jungle. It was not a roar of battle, but a sound of pure pain. It was followed by a massive explosion. Naruto's head snapped towards the sound, his relaxed demeanor vanishing in an instant, replaced by the sharp focus of a predator. What was that? Dory. Nami breathed, horrified. They both knew what it meant. Someone had interfered. The sacred, 100-year duel had been desecrated. Naruto didn't hesitate. Trouble, he muttered, and then he was gone, a golden flash that disappeared into the trees in the direction of the explosion. Nami was frozen for a second, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Naruto's offer, the charts, the giant's scream. She shook her head, her own resolve taking over. Luffy was over there. Her friends were in danger. She grabbed the scroll from the deck and shoved it into her belt. Then, after a quick, frantic effort to wake Usopp, they both plunged into the jungle after him. They arrived at a clearing to a scene of utter devastation. Dory was on the ground, clutching his stomach. A massive hole blown through it. He was bleeding profusely. Luffy was there, looking utterly enraged, along with Vivi. Standing over the fallen giant were a collection of bizarre figures. A man in a suit with a giant, 3, on his head, a little girl in a sundress holding a painter's palette, and a hulking man with a candle on his head. Mr. 3, Miss Goldenweek, Mr. 5, Vivi identified them, her voice trembling with rage. Agents of Baroque Works. Mr. 3, a man with a hairstyle shaped like a flaming number 3, laughed condescendingly. We couldn't have these 2 grams. Yonts interfering with our primary mission, now could we? A simple exploding barrel of ale was all it took to end a century of foolishness. And now, we have a bounty of 100 million berry to collect from each of them. Luffy was shaking with a rage Nami had never seen before. It was a cold, quiet fury. You interfered with their duel, he said, his voice dangerously low. You mocked their honor. Before Luffy could attack, Brigitte came crashing through the trees from the other side of the clearing. He saw his fallen rival and let out a roar of pure, heartbroken fury. But he too had been tricked, led astray by wax copies of Luffy and Vivi. Mr. 3 snapped his fingers. Candle lock. He exuded a massive amount of wax from his body, which quickly ensnared Brigitte's feet, trapping the giant in place. Then he turned his attention to the others. And now for the rest of you pests. He created a massive, elaborate structure of wax, a grotesque, spinning birthday cake. A blade of wax shot out, ensnaring Zoro, who had just arrived on the scene. Nami and Usopp were caught next, trapped in a cage of hardening candle wax. This wax is as hard as steel once it solidifies. Mr. 3 gloated. In a few moments, you'll all be lovely wax statues. A testament to my artistic genius. A giant, spinning top of wax began to descend from the top of the structure, preparing to cover them completely. From a high branch of a colossal tree overlooking the clearing, Naruto watched the scene unfold. His sensory abilities were screaming at him. The agents of Baroque Works were small fry, but their techniques were insidious. He could intervene at any moment. A single Rasengan would shatter the wax structure. He could take down Mr. 3 in less than a second. But his mission was to capture Luffy, not save him. And a marine captain openly aiding pirates, even against other criminals, was an act that could get him court-martialed. Garp's protection only went so far. He watched as Nami struggled against the wax, her face a mask of terror. He saw the hardening wax begin to cover her legs, her defiant expression slowly turning to one of despair. And in that moment, the mission didn't matter. Garp's orders didn't matter. The rigid laws of the world government didn't matter. He wouldn't let her die. But he wouldn't be a fool about it. He created a dozen shadow clones in the trees around the clearing. They were silent, unseen. Luffy, meanwhile, was fighting Mr. 3, but he was being hampered by Miss Goldenweek's color's trap, a bizarre ability that used paint to control emotions, forcing him into fits of laughter or sadness. Naruto made his move. It was not an attack, but a series of precise, strategic strikes. Wind style. Air bullets. 5 of his clones inhaled and fired dozens of small, hyper-compressed spheres of air. They didn't target the pirates. They targeted the wax structure. The air bullets struck the spinning wax top, not with enough force to shatter it, but enough to alter its trajectory. Instead of descending evenly, it tilted, crashing into the side of the cake, slowing its descent and creating a massive structural flaw. Mr. 3, distracted by his fight with Luffy, barely noticed. What was that? An earthquake. At the same time, Naruto's other clones moved on the ground. They didn't engage Mr. 3 directly. They created chaos. One clone used a transformation jutsu to become a copy of Mr. 5, yelling false orders. Another created a simple earth-style jutsu, a small tremor that kicked up dust and further confused the Baroque Works agents. The real Naruto focused his chakra into his hand, weaving it into a fine, sharp blade of wind. Wind style. Blade of wind. From his perch in the trees, he swung his arm. An invisible blade of pure wind, sharp enough to cut stone, shot across the clearing. It didn't aim for the pirates. It sliced through the base of a massive, petrified tree that stood next to the wax cake. The ancient tree groaned, teetered for a moment, and then fell with a cataclysmic crash. Its upper branches smashing into the side of the wax structure, shattering a huge section of Nami's and Zoro's prison. It was enough. Zoro, freed from the waist up, used his swords to break the rest of the wax around him. Nami scrambled free, gasping for air. What's happening? Mr. 3 shrieked, his plan collapsing into chaos around him. Naruto's clones melted back into the trees, their work done. From the perspective of anyone on the ground, it looked like a series of lucky accidents. A random earthquake, a falling tree. No one saw the hand that had guided the chaos. Freed from their trap and inspired by Luffy's unwavering rage, the Straw Hats turned the tide. Usopp fired an explosive star that ignited the wax covering Luffy, freeing him from his emotional stupor. Sanji, having finally found his way, arrived with a devastating kick to Mr. 5's face. Luffy, now burning with righteous fury, ignored Mr. 3's wax armor and delivered a final, devastating Gum-Gu bazooka that sent the Baroque Works agent flying into the next jungle over. In the aftermath, as the giants roared in triumph and gratitude, clearing a path through the sea itself for the Straw Hats to escape. Nami stood on the deck of the Going Merry, her hand resting on the scroll Naruto had given her. She had been terrified, trapped, moments from death. And then, a series of impossible coincidences had saved her. An earthquake, a falling tree. She looked toward the jungle, half expecting to see a flash of gold, but there was nothing. He had been there. She knew it. He hadn't saved them, not directly. He had given them an opening. He had tipped the scales just enough for them to save themselves. Why? Why would the man tasked with her captain's capture orchestrate her rescue? Her enemy had offered her a map, a choice, and a chance. Her mind was a mess of contradictions. He was a marine. He was the enemy. But his actions spoke a different language. A language of respect, and something more. Something she was afraid to name. The mission was to catch Luffy. But standing there, the salty wind on her face, the precious charts tucked safely away, Nami realized the real battle wasn't for her captain. It was for her, and she had no idea whose side was winning. In his sanctum in Mary Geoise, Grand Inquisitor Valerius reviewed the latest report. It had come through an encrypted channel from his contact within Baroque Works, the warlord Crocodile. Subject: Yellow Flash, has been sighted again. Location: Little Garden. He engaged agents of Baroque Works, utilizing techniques that manipulate the very environment. Wind pressure and seismic activity. His actions directly resulted in the escape of the Straw Hat Pirates. Valerius's golden eyes narrowed. This was no longer a coincidence. This Marine, this Naruto Uzumaki, was a rogue element of the highest order. He operated outside the bounds of conventional Marine strategy, and his power was unnatural. It did not smell of hockey or a devil fruit. It smelled of something older. Something heretical. He is not enforcing justice, Valerius whispered to the empty room. He is cultivating chaos. He is observing the heretic, testing him, allowing him to grow stronger. He steepled his fingers, his mind a cold, crystalline lattice of logic. Perhaps they are connected, two sides of the same aberrant coin. He pressed a button on his console. A voice, clipped and professional, answered immediately. Yes, Lord Valerius. Activate Agent Stussy of CP0. Her new assignment is the Straw Hat Pirates. But her primary target is not the captain. A thin, cruel smile touched Valerius's lips. Her target is the Marine who follows them like a shadow. I want to know everything about Captain Naruto Uzumaki. His past, his power, his purpose. It is time the hand of God took a more personal interest in this anomaly. The hunt had just escalated. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Drum of a Dying Kingdom. The cold came on suddenly, a thief in the night. One moment they were sailing through the temperate waters near Little Garden, the next they were plunged into a frigid sea, the air frosting their breath and ice crusting the rigging of the Going Merry. Nami had consulted the charts Naruto had given her, the elegant, terrifyingly accurate scrolls that felt like a secret shame every time she unrolled them. They showed this route, a cold current that was a known shortcut to the Alabasta kingdom. But they hadn't accounted for this. For the sheer, bone-deep misery of it. And they hadn't accounted for Nami getting sick. It started with a shiver she couldn't shake, then a fever that left her skin burning and her mind adrift. Within a day, she was delirious, muttering about maps and money and a village shrouded in mist. She was the heart of their voyage, the mind that guided them through the madness of the Grand Line. And she was dying. 40 degrees Celsius, Vivi cried, pulling a thermometer from Nami's mouth, her face pale with worry. If we don't find a doctor soon. Luffy stood over Nami's sickbed, his usual grin replaced by a grim, tight line. He looked at the endless, icy ocean, a sea with no land in sight. For the first time since setting sail, he looked lost. We need an island, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. Now, as if in answer to his command, a shape resolved itself out of the swirling snow ahead. It was an island, but like none they had ever seen. It was a single, colossal mountain, flat on top like a drum, its sheer cliffs rising vertically from the sea. A winter island. There, Sanji yelled from the crow's nest, pointing. I see a town at the base. There was no time to question their luck. They sailed towards it, a desperate hope warming them against the biting wind. But the island was not a sanctuary. The town at the base, Big Horn, was deserted, the people hostile and fearful. They spoke of a tyrant king, Wapol, a glutton with a devil fruit power that allowed him to eat anything, who had returned after being chased away by the pirate Blackbeard. In a fit of supreme selfishness, he had driven out every doctor in the kingdom, keeping only his personal physicians, the Dr. 20. For himself in his castle atop the sheer cliffs of the Drum Rockies. To the people of Drum, a pirate ship was a harbinger of more pain. They refused them entry, refused them a doctor. It was only through the intervention of Dalton, the former head of the guard and a man with a conscience, that they learned the truth. There was one doctor left on the island who did not answer to Wapol. A witch, named Drive Kurha, who lived at the peak of the mountain, in Wapol's abandoned castle. The choice was simple: to save Nami, they had to climb a 5,000-meter sheer cliff face in a blizzard, carrying their ailing navigator on their backs. Luffy didn't hesitate. "Sanji, you're with me. You're strong." He strapped Nami, wrapped in a dozen blankets, to his back. Sanji did the same for the supplies. And without another word, they began to climb. From a snow-covered ridge overlooking the town of Big Horn, two figures watched the entire scene unfold through a high-powered spyglass. They were clad in thick, white winter cloaks that made them all but invisible against the landscape. "They're insane," Shikamaru Nara stated, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "Climbing that cliff in this weather. They'll die of exposure before they get halfway up. Troublesome." Naruto didn't lower his own spyglass. He watched the two small figures begin their impossible ascent, a rubber man and a chef, carrying their world on their backs. "No, they're not insane," he said, his voice soft. "They're loyal. There's a difference." They had arrived at Drum Island 2 days ahead of the Straw Hats. Naruto's prediction had been flawless. He knew the Grand Line was a meat grinder. Sickness, injury, they were inevitable. And a rookie crew without a doctor was a sitting duck. He had used his charts, his ship's superior speed, and a timely push from a wind jutsu to outpace them. He was here waiting, a silent, unseen variable. "So what's the plan, Captain?" Shikamaru asked, pulling his cloak tighter. "Wapol is a world government-affiliated king. We can't just march in and depose him, even if he is a world-class scumbag. And we certainly can't be seen helping the pirates we're supposed to be capturing." Naruto lowered his spyglass, his blue eyes distant. He was remembering Little Garden. Remembering the feeling of Nami's arm as he pulled her to safety, the look of despair on her face as the wax closed in. He had sworn an oath to the world government, to justice. But watching her now, so fragile and helpless, being carried up a frozen mountain by a crew of misfits who would rather die than abandon her, that oath felt thin. Brittle. "We're not going to be seen," Naruto said. He made a single hand sign, and a dozen copies of himself appeared in the snow around them in silent puffs of smoke. "The mission parameters have changed." Shikamaru raised an eyebrow. They have, Naruto confirmed, his gaze locked on the climbing figures. "New objective. Ensure the Straw Hats navigator gets medical attention. All other considerations are secondary." A slow grin spread across Shikamaru's face. This was the Naruto he knew. The one who followed his own code of justice, a code that often had little to do with the one written in the Marine Handbook. "What a drag," he said, the words holding no complaint at all. "What are your orders?" "Clones, spread out," Naruto commanded. "I want eyes and ears all over this island. One of you, make contact with that Dalton fellow. He seems like a decent man. Get a full intelligence report on Wapol and his forces. The rest of you, shadow the king. I want to know everywhere he goes, everything he eats." He paused, then looked at Shikamaru. "We're not just here to save Nami. We're here to liberate a kingdom." He was improvising, acting on instinct, on a feeling. He saw a crew's devotion, a people's suffering, and a woman's life hanging in the balance, and he made a choice. The mission to capture Luffy could wait. The climb was hell. A vertical nightmare of ice, snow, and razor-sharp rock. They were attacked by giant, carnivorous rabbits. An avalanche, triggered by the rabbits, nearly swept them away. Sanji, protecting Luffy, broke several ribs and suffered internal injuries. He collapsed, unable to go on. Luffy didn't stop. He took Sanji on his arm, Nami on his back, and kept climbing. His hands were raw, bleeding stumps, his bare feet frozen blue. He climbed with his teeth when he had to, his body a testament to sheer, unadulterated will. He was no longer a cheerful, goofy captain. He was a force of nature, a primal embodiment of determination. Naruto watched it all from a parallel cliff face, a single, silent observer. He could have stopped the avalanche with a wall of earth. He could have defeated the giant rabbits in a second. But he didn't. This was their trial, their proof. He needed to see it. He needed to see the lengths Luffy would go to. For her. And what he saw humbled him. He had seen courage in battle, sacrifice in the line of duty. But this was different. This was the raw, unconditional love of a family, a bond he had once known, and now desperately missed. This idiot in a straw hat, this boy he was supposed to capture. was displaying a brand of honor that made the giant's 100-year duel look like a childish game. When Luffy finally reached the summit, collapsing unconscious the snow at the feet of a talking reindeer and a 139-year-old doctor, Naruto finally turned away. He had seen enough. He returned to the hidden base camp his clones had established in an ice cave. Shikamaru was there, a map of the island scratched into the ice floor. Wapol is on his way back, Shikamaru reported, pointing to a spot on the map. His ship just docked. He heard Kurha was occupying his castle and he's coming to reclaim it. He's got his Dr. 20 and a small army with him. Good, Naruto said, his voice cold as the ice around them. Let him come. He knelt by the map. The Straw Hats have done their part. Now we do ours. What followed was a campaign of silent, invisible warfare. As Wapol's army marched up the mountain, a Naruto clone, disguised as one of his soldiers, SPR. EAD rumors of a Yeti in the Eastern Pass, sending half the force on a wild goose chase. Another clone used a low-level wind jutsu to create a constant, disorienting whistling sound that echoed through the canyons, fraying the nerves of the remaining troops and making them jump at shadows. A third clone laid a series of simple, non-lethal traps, pitfalls filled with snow, tripwires that triggered small, harmless avalanches, that delayed and demoralized the army, separating them from their king. By the time Wapol reached the summit on his hippo-like steed, his army was scattered, lost, and terrified. He arrived at his castle to find not a disciplined fighting force, but 2 pirates and a reindeer waiting for him. The battle that followed was legendary for the people of Drum. Luffy, now recovered and burning with a new fire, fought to protect the flag of the man who had been Chopper's father figure, a pirate doctor named Hiralik. It was a flag that symbolized a promise, a belief that there was no disease that couldn't be cured. Wapol mocked that belief, mocked the flag, and in doing so, sealed his own fate. Luffy's rage was absolute. He unleashed a flurry of attacks that sent Wapol and his top 2 henchmen flying off the island, a human cannonball fired from a rubber slingshot. While the battle raged on the castle parapets, Naruto moved inside. The castle was a maze of cold stone and forgotten luxury. He moved like a whisper, his senses guiding him. He found the infirmary, and he found her. Nami was lying in a warm bed, an IV drip in her arm. Doctor. Kurha had worked her magic, the fever had broken, and the color was returning to her cheeks. She was asleep, her breathing deep and even. He stood by her bedside for a long time, just watching. The fierce, intelligent navigator, the woman who had faced down Arlong and defied a marine captain, looked so peaceful, so vulnerable. His offer on Little Garden seemed like a cruel joke now. He had asked her to abandon the very people Ho would literally climb mountains and freeze to death for her. He had appealed to her logic, but he had failed to understand her heart. He reached out, his hand hovering over her forehead. He hesitated. This was a line he had never crossed. His abilities, his past, he kept them hidden, a secret buried deep beneath his marine persona. But seeing her here, after everything, he let his hand rest gently on her brow. He channeled a minuscule amount of his chakra, molding it into the warm, gentle energy of medical ninjutsu. It wasn't a grand healing. It was a soft, golden glow that seeped into her, soothing the lingering aches, easing the inflammation in her lungs, and pushing back the last vestiges of the disease. It was a comfort, a quiet reassurance. Nami stirred in her sleep. Her brow furrowed, and her eyes fluttered open for just a second. Through a sleepy, fever-hazed blur, she saw a flash of brilliant blonde hair and 2 eyes as blue as the deepest sea. She felt a warmth on her forehead, a feeling of profound peace and safety that was utterly at odds with where she was. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. She slipped back into a deep, healing sleep, the image already fading into the surreal landscape of a dream. Naruto pulled his hand back as if burned. He had done it. He had directly interfered, had used that power to help her. He was no longer an observer. He was compromised. He turned and melted back into the shadows of the castle, his heart a chaotic drum in his chest. Aboard the Swift Justice, anchored in the shadow of a massive iceberg a league away from Drum, Shikamaru was playing shogi against himself. A special Den Den Mushi, one linked to a secure marine intelligence frequency, began to ring. He answered it. Nara here. Commander Nara. A silky, female voice purred from the other end. This is Captain Hina, liaison from Marine Intelligence. This is a non-standard inquiry regarding your commanding officer, Captain Uzumaki. Shikamaru's eyes narrowed. Hina was a known quantity. But this felt off. The call wasn't on the right channel, and the protocol was wrong. Hina is unimpressed with your lack of clearance. State your purpose. My purpose is clarity, the voice said. Ignoring his jab, Captain Uzumaki's record is thin. He appears out of nowhere a year ago under the personal sponsorship of Vice Admiral Garp. His abilities are unlisted. His tactical successes are statistically impossible. We need to know more. What can you tell me about the source of his techniques? Shikamaru moved a piece on his board. He knew a fishing expedition when he heard one. And this hook was baited with the full weight of HQ. But it wasn't HQ. It felt sharper, more dangerous. The captain is a gifted martial artist and a tactical genius. All other information is classified under Vice Admiral Garp's direct authority. There was a soft chuckle on the other end. Of course it is. Very well. Just be aware, Commander, that shadows attract scrutiny. And your captain casts a very long one. We will be watching. Gotcha. The line went dead. Shikamaru stared at the sleeping snail. This wasn't Marine Intelligence. It was too slick, too subtle. This was something else. Something that operated in the shadows Valerius was talking about. They were being hunted, not just by pirates, but by their own side. How troublesome, he murmured, knocking over his own king on the board. He had been outplayed, and the game had just begun. As the Going Merry sailed away from Drum Island, the sky was filled with pink snow. It was the realization of Dr. Hiruluke's dream, a chemical dust fired from cannons that turned the snowflakes into a fleeting vision of cherry blossoms, a symbol of the kingdom's healed heart. Nami stood on the deck, a new crewmate, a small, blue-nosed reindeer doctor named Tony Chopper, at her side. She was fully recovered, her body strong, her mind clear. But she couldn't shake the dream she'd had. The flash of gold, the feeling of a warm hand on her forehead. It had felt so real. She looked out at the pink snow, a strange feeling blooming in her chest. A feeling of gratitude, not just for her crew, but for a ghost. A golden enemy who seemed to be her guardian angel. She didn't understand it. She didn't know what it meant. But she knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that he had been there. And he had saved her. Again. High on the peak of the Drum Rockies, Naruto watched the small ship with its sheep figurehead disappear over the horizon. He had done it. He had saved a kingdom, protected a crew of pirates, and healed the woman he was supposed to be chasing. He had broken every rule in the book. And he didn't regret a single thing. The mission was a shambles. His duty was a lie. All he knew for sure was that his path was now inextricably linked to the Straw Hat Pirates, and to the fiery navigator who was slowly, surely, capturing his heart. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Sands of Revolution. The heat of Alabasta was a physical presence. A suffocating blanket that stole the breath and baked the very life from the land. For years, this kingdom had been dying of thirst, a nation of sand and sorrow ruled by a benevolent king who was powerless against the curse of a warlord. When the Going Merry docked at the port of Nanohana, it was to the sight of a desperate people and a sky as empty and unforgiving as a god's blind eye. Chaos found them, as it always did. They were barely afoot on the sun-scorched earth before they ran headlong into Captain Smoker and his marines, a plume of angry smoke in a town of simmering resentment. The chase was frantic, a chaotic scramble through crowded markets that was complicated by the sudden appearance of a freckled young man with a fiery fist and a familiar, reckless grin. Portgas D. Ace, Luffy's older brother and the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, was a whirlwind of flame and charisma who single-handedly held off Smoker, allowing the Straw Hats to escape into the unforgiving wilderness of the desert. Miles away, in the sprawling capital of Alubarna, the heart of the kingdom, no one noticed the new face in the crowd. He was a traveling merchant. Unremarkable in his dusty robes, his features plain, his presence forgettable. He moved through the city with a quiet purpose, his ears open, his senses spread wide. This merchant was a ghost. A perfect disguise that hid the brilliant blonde hair and sky-blue eyes of Naruto Uzumaki. While his crew chased rumors in the port towns, He was at the center of the spider's web, listening to the whispers of rebellion. Feeling the pulse of a nation on the brink of self-destruction. He sat at an outdoor cafe, nursing a cup of water, and watched the royal guard patrol the streets. They were tense, their faces etched with the strain of holding a kingdom together. Across the plaza, the rebel army, led by Vivi's childhood friend Koza, was gaining more and more public support. The people believed King Cobra had stolen the reign, and Crocodile, the nation's supposed hero, was fanning the flames of their hatred. Naruto's mind was a calm sea in this storm of misinformation. He was linked, not by a Den Mushi, but by a silent, invisible thread of chakra to his second-in-command. In a hidden cave miles out in the desert, Shikamaru Nara sat before a map carved into the sand, small stones representing troop movements, key figures, and logistical routes. An array of shadow clones, disguised as everything from desert nomads to scorpions, were his eyes and ears across the vast kingdom. They were waging a war that no one else knew existed. Operation Utopia. Shikamaru's voice echoed in Naruto's mind, a direct, mental communication between the original and his most trusted clone, a technique they had perfected. It's a masterstroke of deception. Crocodile isn't just starting a war, he's planning to step in and save the country at the last second, making himself the undisputed king. It's diabolically troublesome. He's overplaying his hand, Naruto thought back, his eyes scanning the crowd. A plan this complex has too many moving parts. Find the weak points. Communications. Supply lines. Find the linchpin and we pull it. Already on it, came the weary, mental reply. But the straw hats are a problem. They're a chaotic, unpredictable variable. They're heading straight for the heart of the rebel army at Yuba. They'll stumble right into Crocodile's path. Naruto took a sip of water, his gaze hardening. Let them. They're Vivi's shield. Our job is to clear the path. He stood up, dropping a few berry on the table, and melted back into the river of people. He was no longer a marine captain. He was a shadow, a whisper of wind in a land of fire and sand. The desert was a merciless opponent. It attacked with blistering sun, freezing nights, and a soul-crushing monotony that wore down the spirit. Nami felt it more than anyone. She was a creature of the sea, of winds and currents. This static, lifeless expanse was her personal hell. Every day was a struggle, a battle to keep the crew hydrated, on course, and from killing each other out of sheer heat-stroked irritation. She sat huddled against a rock during a brief nighttime rest, checking her compass and then staring at the stars. They felt alien here, cold and distant. She felt a presence beside her and looked up to see Vivi. Her royal composure frayed, her eyes filled with a desperate sadness. "Do you think we can make it in time?" Vivi asked, her voice barely a whisper. "My people, they're going to kill each other over a lie." Nami looked at her crew, asleep around a dying fire. Luffy, snoring with a bubble coming out of his nose. Zoro, somehow getting lost even in his sleep. Usopp, muttering about giant desert spiders. They were idiots. They were a chaotic, dysfunctional mess. But they were here. They were crossing a deadly desert for her country. "We'll make it," Nami said, her voice LLED with a conviction that surprised even herself. "Because Luffy promised you he'd save your kingdom. And he's too stupid to break a promise." As she spoke, a faint breeze kicked up. It was cool, a gentle caress against their sunburnt skin, chasing away the oppressive heat lingering in the sand. It felt unnatural, like a sip of cool water in the heart of a furnace. She looked around, her navigator's senses tingling. The air currents were wrong. A breeze like this shouldn't exist in a dead calm like tonight. She dismissed it as a desert anomaly, a trick of the heat, but the feeling lingered. Miles away, perched on a high dune, a shadow clone of Naruto lowered its hand and dissipated into a puff of sand. The real Naruto, trekking parallel to the straw hats, felt the clone's memory return to him. He felt Nami's exhaustion, her unwavering resolve, her brief moment of confusion at the impossible breeze. He allowed himself a small, grim smile. He couldn't fight her battles for her, but he could, at least, make the journey a little less hellish. Their paths finally converged in Rainbase, the city of dreams, where a massive casino run by Crocodile served as the headquarters for Baroque Works. Here, Luffy's reckless charge came to a predictable, disastrous end. He confronted the warlord, and he was utterly, comprehensively defeated. Naruto watched from the rooftop of an adjacent wheel. Dinga's crocodile impaled Luffy with his golden hook, draining the moisture from his body and leaving him for dead, a desiccated husk sinking into the sand. Naruto's fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. His every instinct screamed at him to jump down, to form a Rasengan in his palm and drive it through the arrogant warlord's smug face. He could do it, he knew he could, but the cost would be catastrophic. A marine captain, a supposed agent of the world government, assassinating a warlord of the sea. It would trigger an international incident. The full might of the admirals would descend on him. He would lose any chance of operating in the shadows, any chance of uncovering the deeper conspiracy at play. And he would be abandoning his mission. He would be abandoning her. He forced himself to stay still, to watch as Crocodile walked away, leaving Luffy to be buried by the shifting sands. This was the cold, hard calculus of his new reality. To win the war, sometimes you had to lose a battle. But he wouldn't lose his queen. Or, in this case, Luffy. He sent a mental command. 2 blocks away, a Naruto clone disguised as a low-level Baroque Works agent burst into a backroom several other agents were monitoring the city. Emergency. The clone yelled. Mr. Chuban Clay is engaging a squad of Marines near the south gate. He's compromised. And Miss All Sunday was C.N. heading for the casino owner's private exit. She looked like she was in a hurry. The agents panicked. The idea of their second-in-command abandoning her post was more alarming than a brawl with the Marines. The false report created a window of chaos, a 5-minute gap where all eyes were turned away from the alley where Luffy lay dying. It was a big enough opening for a shadowy figure with a parasol to slip in unseen. To lift the dying boy from his sandy grave. Naruto watched as Nico Robin carried Luffy away, her motives a mystery, her actions serving his purpose. He had not saved Luffy, he had nudged the chessboard just enough for Luffy to be saved. It felt like a coward's victory, and the bitter taste of it settled deep in his gut. The news of Luffy's defeat hit the crew like a physical blow. They were in a tunnel, fleeing Crocodile's trap, the walls threatening to close in and drown them. For a moment, despair threatened to consume them. But Nami, her face streaked with grime and tears, looked at Vivi's heartbroken expression and found a new strength. We don't have time to cry, she yelled, her voice raw. Luffy fought so we could get Vivi to Alubarna. If we give up now, his sacrifice was for nothing. We are getting to that capital and we are stopping that rebellion. She took charge. Using the marine charts Naruto had given her, she found a route, a dangerous, used canyon pass that would cut 2 days off their journey. It was a gamble, but it was their only chance. Their flight became a desperate race against time, hounded at every turn by Baroque Works, elite. But something strange kept happening. As Mr. Chuban Clay and his agents closed in on them from behind, a sudden, violent sandstorm erupted out of a clear sky, blinding their pursuers and Alawi. Ing the Straw Hats to gain precious distance. When Miss Merry Christmas and Mr. Four tried to intercept them at the canyon entrance, a freak rockslide, seemingly triggered by a tremor, blocked the pass just moments after they had cleared it. They were being helped, protected. Nami knew it now. These weren't accidents. The gentle breezes, the convenient sandstorms, the timely rockslides, it was a pattern. It was him. Her mysterious, golden-haired stalker was clearing their path, a guardian angel clad in the uniform of their enemy. The knowledge sent a shiver down her spine that was equal parts fear and a strange, confusing warmth. He wasn't just watching her, he was protecting her crew. He was helping them save a kingdom. The contradiction was so vast, her mind couldn't find purchase on it. From his sand-carved command center, Shikamaru moved his stone markers. Mr. 2 is neutralized for at least 6 hours. Miss Merry Christmas is trapped. Your clones are performing admirably, his thoughts projected to Naruto, who was now racing towards Alubarna on foot, a blur of motion across the dunes. It's not enough, Naruto sent back, his mind focused on the capital. Crocodile's plan is already in motion. The final battle is about to begin. The bomb. My clones have located it, Shikamaru replied. It's in the clock tower in the central plaza. Set to detonate in less than an hour. It'll wipe out everyone within a 5-mile radius. Rebels and royals alike. Don't disarm it, Naruto ordered, a risky, audacious plan forming in his mind. Just make sure Vivi and her people find it. This has to be their victory, not ours. He arrived on the outskirts of Alubarna as the first cannons fired. The city was a maelstrom of violence, the royal army clashing with the rebel army in a tragic, pointless civil war. The Straw Hats had already arrived, plunging headfirst into battle, each finding their opponent among Crocodile's officer agents. Naruto moved to a high rooftop overlooking the plaza, a phantom in the chaos. His eyes immediately found her. She was facing Miss Doublefinger, a woman who could produce sharp spikes from her entire body. It was a terrible matchup. Nami was a navigator, a thief, not a frontline fighter. She was dodging and weaving, using her newly upgraded Kleem attack to create balls of hot and cold air, but it was a desperate defense. Miss Doublefinger lunged, her a spear of razor-sharp needles aimed directly at Nami's heart. Nami was too slow, her parry too weak. This was it, she was going to die. Naruto's eyes hardened. He had stayed his hand, manipulated events from the shadows, but this he would not allow. He inhaled sharply, gathered the wind in his lungs, and exhaled. It was not a jutsu, not a grand display of power. It was a single, focused, violent gust of wind. A blade of air that shot across the plaza in a heartbeat. The gust struck Miss Doublefinger from the side. It wasn't strong enough to injure her, but it was a solid, unexpected blow that threw off her balance. Her killing lunge veering a few fatal inches to the left. It was the only opening Nami needed. Tornado tempo, she screamed, slamming the ends of her staff together. A powerful, swirling vortex of wind erupted from the weapon, catching the off-balance agent and sending her flying, crashing into a stone wall with bone-shattering force. Nami stood panting, her body bruised and battered, staring at her fallen opponent. She had won, but she hadn't done it alone. She felt that gust of wind. It had come from nowhere, an invisible hand that had saved her life. She scanned the rooftops, her heart pounding, searching for a sign, a flash of gold. She saw nothing but smoke and chaos. But she knew, he was there. At that same moment, Shikamaru's plan reached its climax. Two of his clones, disguised as royal guards, ran frantically into the command post of Captain Chaka. "Sir, we've found him. The man who impersonated the king at Nanohana. He's trying to fire the main palace cannon into the plaza." The report was a lie, but it sent Chaka and his best men racing to the cannon, where they found and subdued Mr. Seven and Miss Father's Day. Another clone, disguised as a wounded rebel soldier, stumbled up to Koza. "The king, he's a traitor, but not the way you think. There's a bomb, under the clock tower, meant to kill us all." He shoved a piece of paper, a hastily on map provided by Shikamaru, into Koza's hand before dying. The dominoes began to fall. The rebellion's focus shifted from fighting to finding the bomb. Vivi, with Pell's help, pinpointed its location. The war was not over. But its purpose had been shattered, replaced by a frantic, unified effort to save the city. The final act belonged to Luffy. He arrived like a vengeful god, having been saved and rehydrated, and engaged Crocodile in a final, brutal battle that raged from the palace streets to the royal catacombs. He used his own blood to bypass Crocodile's sand defenses and finally defeat Ed the Warlord with a gum-gum storm that blasted him up through bedrock and into the light of day. And then, as if by a miracle, the rain began to fall. As the kingdom of Alabasta celebrated its salvation, Naruto and Shikamaru slipped away. Their work done, they left behind a nation on the path to healing and a pirate crew that had, against all odds, defeated a warlord. Later, on the deck of the Swift Justice, hidden in a foggy patch of sea miles from the Alabastan coast, Shikamaru handed Naruto a small, encrypted data chip recovered from Crocodile's hidden study. "His plan was even bigger than we thought," Shikamaru said, his voice grim. "He wasn't just after the throne. He was after Pluton, the ancient weapon." Naruto took the chip. The world government would do anything to get their hands on that. Someone else was watching him, too, Shikamaru added, pointing to a corrupted file directory on the chip. His network was compromised. "I found a data ghost, a signature from another intelligence agency." He brought up an image on a monitor. It was a simple, five-pointed star, the crest of the celestial dragons. They knew what he was doing. They were monitoring him, letting him do the dirty work of finding the weapon for them. Naruto's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a rogue warlord anymore. This reached the very top. To the gods of this world, the shadowy figures in Mary Geoise. To Grand Inquisitor Valerius. They're not just hunting pirates, Naruto said, his voice a low growl. They're playing a different game entirely. His secret war had just collided with another, older, and infinitely more dangerous one. And he and his crew, a tiny marine frigate against the world, were caught squarely in the middle. Nami stood on the palace balcony, letting the cool rain wash over her. She thought of the battle, of the impossible wind that had saved her. She was a navigator. She understood the world through logic, through patterns and signs. And the pattern was clear. He was her enemy, and he was her protector. He was a force of nature, a storm she couldn't predict, a mystery she was beginning to realize she didn't want to solve. She just wanted to understand. And that, she feared, was the most dangerous desire of all. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Whisper of the Sky. The farewell to Alabasta was a silent one. No grand speeches, no tearful goodbyes. Just the sight of a lone princess on a distant shore, her back to them, and the raised arms of a kingdom's worth of friends, a silent testament to a bond that defied words and laws. On their forearms, hidden beneath sleeves and bandages, they all bore the same mark, an X, that bound them together across the sea. It was a victory, clean and absolute, yet as the Going Merry sailed away, a new and unsettling tension settled over its decks. Her name was Nico Robin. She had appeared on their ship as if from thin air, a stowaway with a serene smile and eyes that held the quiet, patient depth of ancient ruins. To Luffy, who she had saved from a sandy grave, her presence was a simple matter of a debt repaid. To the rest of the crew, she was Miss All Sunday, the second in command of the very organization that had nearly destroyed them all. A viper they had inexplicably invited into their nest. Nami felt it most acutely. She was the crew's de facto accountant of trust, and Robin was a debt she couldn't begin to calculate. The dark-haired woman moved with a silent grace, her very presence a question mark. She would sit for hours, reading, a small, knowing smile on her lips, as if she were privy to A.J. Oak the rest of the world hadn't heard yet. Nami found herself watching her, trying to decipher her, but it was like trying to read a map written in a dead language. She gives me the creeps, Usopp W. Whispered to Nami as they coiled ropes on the main deck, his eyes darting nervously towards Robin, who was calmly watering a small potted flower she'd brought aboard. I mean, she was the enemy. The main enemy's right-hand woman. What if she tries to assassinate us in our sleep? She won't. Zoro grunted from his position against the railing, where he was cleaning his swords. If she wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. She's strong. Zoro's simple, martial logic did little to soothe Nami's unease. It wasn't just Robin's past. It was her unnerving calm, her quiet intelligence. It felt familiar. It reminded her of the calculated stillness of another figure who haunted their journey, a man who saw the world as a grand, strategic game. Their unease was shattered by a sound from the heavens. A shadow fell over them. And with a cataclysmic crash, a galleon, larger than any they had ever seen, plummeted from the sky and slammed into the sea beside them, its broken mast narrowly missing their ship. What followed was a typically Straw Hat descent into madness. They salvaged a map from the wreckage, a chart not of the sea, but of the sky. The ship's log told a wild, impossible tale of a city of gold on an island in the clouds. A place called Skypiea. Luffy's eyes lit up with a fire that Nami knew was impossible to extinguish. A sky island. An adventure. Absolutely not. Nami snapped, her pragmatism a firm anchor against the tide of his insanity. We have no way of getting up there. We don't have wings, Luffy. We are a boat. The log mentioned a knock upstream, Robin said, her voice soft but clear. All eyes turned to her. She was examining the sky map with a scholar's intensity. It's a powerful, explosive ocean current said to be strong enough to launch a ship into the sky. And it's rumored that the lost city of Shandora, with its golden poneglyph, was carried into the clouds centuries ago. The word, poneglyph, changed everything. It was the key to the true history. The entire purpose of Robin's dangerous life. Suddenly, this wasn't just Luffy's whim. It was part of their grander, unspoken quest. Nami looked at the faces of her crewmates and knew she had lost. Her logic was no match for the combined weight of adventure and destiny. Fine, she sighed, rubbing her temples. But if we are going to do this, we need information. The map points to an island called Jaya. Let's start there. And let's hope we don't all die in a ridiculous, upside-down waterfall. Aboard the Swift Justice, the atmosphere was far more somber. The data chip from Crocodile's study was a Pandora's box of conspiracies. Shikamaru had spent 2 days decrypting its deepest layers, his usual bored expression replaced by one of grim concentration. It's just as we feared, he said, pointing to a complex diagram he'd sketched out on a slate board. Crocodile was a pawn, a well-funded, powerful pawn, but a pawn nonetheless. The world government, or at least a shadow element within it, was using him. They funneled him resources through back channels, overlooked his activities, all on the off chance he might unearth Pluton for them. He tapped a name on the board. And Nico Robin is the key. She's not just a person. She's a weapon locator, the only one in the world. Naruto stared at the board, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into a terrifying picture. So her joining my idiot god brother's crew. As the single most dangerous development in the last 20 years, Shikamaru finished for him. It puts the key to the world's destruction in the hands of the most unpredictable man on the planet. And it puts her squarely in the crosshairs of the people we now know are pulling the strings. He was right. Naruto's mission had inverted itself. He couldn't capture Luffy, not while Robin was with him. Doing so would mean handing the key to the ancient weapons directly to the very people he was beginning to suspect were the real threat. He was no longer a hunter. He was a shepherd, forced to protect a flock of wolves from an even greater predator. A secure Den Den Mushi on his desk, one that bypassed all official marine channels, began to ring with a strange, chirping sound. It was a line he hadn't used in years. He answered, his voice low. It's been a while. The voice on the other end was old and raspy, like stones grinding together. The ripples you are making have reached the shore. Little Maelstrom. Naruto's posture straightened. Jiraiya-sensei. Don't use that name on this line, the old voice grumbled. Listen close. My network has picked up chatter. The hand is moving. They've detected an anomalous energy signature following the Straw Hat Pirates. A signature that matches the residual traces you left behind at Ohara. They're hunting you, boy. Not as a marine, but as a heretic. The line went dead. Naruto stood in silence, the old man's words echoing in the sterile cabin. The Hand. The common underworld name for the Celestial Dragon's secret enforcers. Valerius's personal death squad. They knew. They didn't know who he was, but they knew what he was. His past, the world he had left behind, was catching up to him. Jaya was a pirate's paradise, which meant it was a hell for everyone else. The main settlement, Mock Town, was a lawless, ramshackle collection of bars and gambling dens, populated by pirates whose dreams had died and festered into cynical brutality. The Straw Hats walked into a bar looking for information and found a lecture instead. A tall, lanky pirate with a hyena's grin, Bellamy, held court, mocking the very idea of dreams. The age of pirates was over. He sneered. The One Piece, the Sky Island, they were fantasies for fools. Luffy and Zoro just sat there, taking it. Bellamy's crew smashed bottles over their heads, kicked them to the ground. Stomped on them, and they did not fight back. They took the beating, the humiliation, without raising a single fist. Nami watched, her entire being screaming in protest. She couldn't understand it. They had fought a warlord for a kingdom. They had battled giants and monsters. And here, in a filthy bar, they let this second-rate bully walk all over them. She stormed out, her heart a knot of anger and confusion, leaving them to be thrown into the street like trash. She found herself on a rooftop overlooking the wretched town, the sounds of drunken laughter and casual violence drifting up from below. She felt betrayed, not by their weakness, but by their refusal to fight. What was their pride worth if they let men like that spit on it? Some fights aren't worth the blood. The voice came from behind her, calm and familiar. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Naruto was there, leaning against a chimney, the setting sun catching the gold in his hair. He wasn't in disguise. He wore his simple black shirt and trousers, his white marine coat nowhere in sight. He looked less like a soldier and more like a wanderer, a man perpetually out of place. You, she breathed, a dozen questions and accusations dying on her lips. Me, he said with a small, sad smile. He walked towards her slowly, stopping a few feet away, giving her space. You're angry. They were humiliated, she burst out, the words tumbling over each other. They just let it happen. Why, after everything we've fought for, why would they let a man like that? Because that man's opinion doesn't matter, Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the town below. Your captain knows his dream is real. He knows the One Piece is out there. He doesn't need the validation of a man whose own dreams are already dead. Fighting him wouldn't have proven anything. It would have just been noise. His words cut through her anger, planting a seed of understanding. It wasn't about pride, it was about purpose. Bellamy's world was small, confined to the filth of this town. Luffy's world was as big as the sea itself. But, you, she said, her voice dropping, her confusion shifting to the man in front of her. Alabasta, the sandstorm, the rockslide, that was you. Why are you helping us? What do you want from me? He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw a weariness in his blue eyes. A weight that had nothing to do with his duty as a Marine. The truth is complicated, he said. I'm not just a Marine. I serve a purpose that sometimes puts me at odds with the world government. The war in Alabasta was a symptom of a sickness. Crocodile was just one of the players in a much bigger, much more dangerous game. A game that revolves around the ancient weapons. He took a careful step closer. Your new crewmate, Nico Robin, she's not a pirate. She's the key to that game. There are forces in this world, people at the very top, who will burn kingdoms to the ground to get their hands on her. I'm not helping you to be kind, Nami. I'm helping you because right now, your idiot captain and his unshakable loyalty are the only thing standing between Robin and a global catastrophe. It was too much. Warlords, secret organizations, ancient weapons. She was a navigator, a thief. She just wanted to map the world, to be free. So you're just using us? She asked, the words tasting like ash. We're your pawns. No, he said, his voice softening. Never. He looked at her, and the strategic calm in his eyes was replaced by something else, something unguarded and intensely personal. I'm doing this because I see the world you're sailing into. I see the darkness that's coming for all of you, and I don't want to see your light extinguished by it. He paused, the air between them thick with unspoken words. I don't want to see you get extinguished by it. Her breath hitched. This was more than just a mission for him. This was something else. He reached out, not to touch her, but to the klima tact slung over her shoulder. His fingers hovered over the central section. This was bent. In the fight with Miss Doublefinger, he said quietly. Before she could react, a faint, almost invisible shimmer of blue energy flickered around his fingertips. She heard a soft click from within the weapon. He pulled his hand back. There. The pressure alignment was off. It would have misfired the next time you used a cyclone tempo. She stared at him, speechless. He had noticed a flaw she hadn't. He had fixed it with, what? Magic. It was a small, intimate gesture, a display of possible power used for a moment of simple, profound care. He gave her a final, sad smile. Go to your sky island, Nami. Find your city of gold. But be careful. The game has changed, and the real monsters don't live in the sea. He turned, and with a flicker of gold, he was gone, leaving her alone on the rooftop, her heart pounding a frantic, chaotic rhythm against her ribs. In the hallowed, silent halls of Mary Geoise, Grand Inquisitor Valerius looked at a blank report. Agent Stussy has failed, my lord, a subordinate reported, his voice trembling. She could find no trace of the target. It is as if he is a ghost. He leaves no trail, has no known associates outside of his command, and his movements are impossible to predict. Valerius was not angry. A slow, predatory smile touched his lips. An anomaly cannot be measured by conventional means. It is time for an unconventional one. He turned his golden gaze to a figure that stood in the deepest shadows of the room, a being whose sense seemed to absorb the very light and sound around it. Silencer. The figure stepped forward. He was clad in form-fitting gray, his face hidden by a smooth, featureless mask. No sound accompanied his movement. You have a new target, Valerius said, his voice a silken whisper. Go to the Grand Line. Find the anomaly known as the Yellow Flash. Do not engage the Straw Hats. Do not engage him directly unless the opportunity is perfect. I want you to observe him. I want you to understand his power. And if you find a moment of weakness, Valerius's smile widened. Erase the error. The silencer bowed his head, a gesture of absolute, silent obedience, and then dissolved back into the shadows from whence he came. The sea around Jaya turned violent, a swirling vortex of currents converging on a single point. The knock-up stream was coming. The Going Merry, now fitted with crude wings and a chicken's comb, was being battered by the waves, straining at its anchor. From the deck of the Swift Justice, cloaked in a dense fog bank created by Naruto's chakra, they watched the madness unfold. They're actually going to do it, Shikamaru said, a rare note of astonishment in his voice. They're going to ride a geyser into the sky. How utterly, completely troublesome. Naruto's eyes were fixed on the tiny ship. He knew Robin was on that vessel, and with her, the potential location of another ancient weapon. He was trapped between his duty, his own secret war, and the undeniable, illogical pull of his heart. We're going up, too, aren't we? Shikamaru asked with a long-suffering sigh. Naruto's gaze was hard as diamond. We have to. The board is 1,000 meters high now. As he spoke, he felt it. A cold spot in the world. A void. A patch of reality where the hum of life, the energy he could always feel, was simply absent. It was the chilling sensation of being watched by nothingness itself. He didn't know the name or the face, but he knew Valerius had made his next move. The hunt was no longer a secret. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The God and the Heretic. The ascent was not a journey, it was a violation of physics. The Going Merry was flung into the sky on a pillar of churning, pressurized seawater. A tiny wooden cork in a geyser of impossible force. Nami clung to the mast, her knuckles white, her navigator's mind screaming at the sheer, beautiful insanity of it all. They passed through a dark, turbulent tunnel in the clouds, and then they burst through, into a world of impossible light. They were sailing on a sea of clouds. The white sea, as the salvaged log had called it. It stretched to the horizon, a boundless ocean of dense, fluffy white that behaved like water, supporting their ship, creating waves and currents. The sky above was a blue so deep and pure it hurt the eyes, and strange. Winged fish swam through the air in shimmering schools. It's real, Nami whispered, her voice filled with an awe that momentarily eclipsed her fear. She looked at Luffy, who was perched on the sheep's figurehead, his arms thrown wide, drinking in the impossible vista with a grin that threatened to split his face. His dreams, as wild and illogical as they were, kept coming true. Their wonder was short-lived. A masked figure on a strange, winged waver scooter descended upon them, declaring them illegal entrance and demanding a fee of 1 billion XTOL per person. Before they could even begin to negotiate, a colossal sky shark burst from the clouds, and the masked warrior was swept away by a giant, knight-like figure who descended on a winged horse. They had been in the sky for less than an hour, and it was already more chaotic than the Grand Line below. They found their way to Angel Island, a floating landmass populated by winged people with a serene, almost unnerving peacefulness. But a threat lingered beneath the surface. The very air hummed with an unseen tension, a constant, pervasive awareness that felt like being watched by the sky itself. The people spoke of their ruler, God Enel, with a mixture of reverence and terror. To break any of God's laws was to invite a divine judgment from the heavens, a pillar of light that erased the sinner from existence. While the Straw Hats were acclimating to this bizarre new world, another vessel was making a far more controlled ascent. Miles away from the violent knock-up stream, the Swift Justice rose steadily into the sky. Enclosed in a swirling, contained vortex of wind. On the deck, Naruto stood with his hands outstretched, his chakra molding the air currents, lifting his frigate with a smooth, silent power that was an act of godlike will in itself. Shikamaru stood beside him, watching the sea of clouds appear below them. So, a literal sky island, he said with a sigh that frosted the air. This mission just keeps getting more and more troublesome. And I'm guessing the locals aren't going to be thrilled about a second marine vessel showing up unannounced. We're not a marine vessel today, Naruto said, his eyes scanning the horizon. We are a ghost. He lowered his hands as the ship settled into the cloud sea, the wind vortex dissipating. He wove a new set of hand signs, and a thick, chakra-infused fog billowed out from the ship, cloaking it in an impenetrable gray shroud. We stay hidden. We observe. But as he spread his senses, seeking the familiar energy signatures of the Straw Hat crew, he felt it. A cold patch. A null space. It was the same chilling sensation he'd felt at Jaya, but closer now, more defined. It was like a hole had been punched in the fabric of the world. A void where the natural energy of the sky simply ceased to exist. "Shikamaru," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "We have company." Full defensive alert, silent running. Shikamaru didn't question him. He relayed the orders, and the crew of the Swift Justice moved with a quiet efficiency born of absolute trust in their captain. They were no longer just chasing pirates. They were being hunted. The Straw Hats, inevitably, broke the law. By trying to rescue Chopper, who had been taken to the forbidden upper yard, they were branded as criminals. God's judgment descended not as a pillar of light, but as a challenge from his 4 priests. And so began the Ordeal of Balls, a survival game on the massive, jungle-filled island of Upper Yard, the missing half of Jaya that been blasted into the sky centuries ago. The crew was separated. Luffy, drawn by the call of adventure and a giant snake, plunged deep into the jungle. Zoro, Sanji, and Chopper engaged the priests in their bizarre, deadly trials. Nami, Usopp, and Robin took the Going Merry up a cloud river, aiming to find a safe route through the dangerous forest. Nami found herself at the helm, navigating a rear of clouds through a prehistoric jungle, with a terrified sniper and a woman she fundamentally distrusted as her only crew. The air was thick with the hum of Enel's all-pervasive mantra, his ability to hear and feel everything on the island. They were rats in a maze, and the god of this world was the cat. As they navigated a treacherous bend in the river, the sky above them darkened. A figure descended, crackling with raw, blue electricity. He was tall and lean, with unnaturally long earlobes and a condescending, sleepy-eyed expression of absolute boredom. He carried a golden staff and wore loose-fitting pants, his bare chest adorned with a ring of drums. This was Enel. "A legal entrance," he said, his voice a lazy drawl that held no real interest. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble today." He pointed his staff at the ship. "You are all heretics, questioning the divine. For this, you shall be erased." Usopp fired an explosive star, which Enel simply allowed to pass through his crackling, electric form. A Logia, a lightning man. In this sea of conductive clouds, he was invincible. He yawned, then vanished in a flicker of blue static, reappearing directly in front of Nami at the helm. "You," he said, his dead eyes looking her over. "You have a fire in you. A resistance. I can feel it. It's an impurity that must be cleansed." He raised his hand, his fingers crackling. With 1,000,000 volts of divine judgment. Nami stared into the face of her executioner, her mind racing. She was a navigator. She fought with wind and heat and cold. How could she fight lightning itself? How could she fight a god? But as she looked at him, at his lazy, arrogant cruelty, she wasn't just afraid. She was furious. He was just another tyrant. Another Arlong. Another crocodile. A man who used his power to terrorize and control. She held her Klima tacked like a spear. "I don't care if you're a god or not," she snarled, her voice shaking but defiant. "You're not laying a hand on my ship or my friends." Enel's bored expression flickered with a brief spark of amusement. A bold final prayer. He was about to strike when a sound like a mountain breaking echoed across the upper yard. All heads, including Enel's, snapped in the direction of the noise. On the far side of the island, a colossal, vine-covered beanstalk, the giant jack, began to sway violently. A section of its base, hundreds of meters thick, simply exploded outward in a shower of ancient wood and stone. Enel's eyes widened. His mantra hadn't predicted that. It wasn't the work of any of the combatants in his game. It felt natural, like the island itself was lashing out. His curiosity, for the first time, was piqued more by this new puzzle than by the insects on the boat before him. It seems a more interesting sacrifice has presented itself. He mused, and with another crackle of lightning, he was gone, leaving Nami panting, her heart hammering, saved by an impossible, inexplicable act of destruction. Yuto stood on the deck of his cloaked ship, his arm outstretched. He pulled it back, a sphere of swirling, chaotic green energy in his palm dissipating into nothing. It was nature energy, the raw life force of the world. Gathered and compressed into a volatile, unstable Rasengan. He had aimed it from miles away, a silent, invisible sniper shot of pure power. He had felt Nami's terror, her imminent death, and had reacted instinctively. Creating the biggest, loudest diversion he could think of. He had just saved her life, and in doing so, had exposed a fraction of his true power to this sky. And the silence was waiting for him. The cold spot, the void, was no longer on the periphery of his senses. It was on his ship. The chakra-infused fog around them began to thin, not as if it were blowing away, but as if it were being unmade. The very energy that composed it was being nullified. Shikamaru drew a blade, his lazy demeanor gone, replaced by the sharp-edged focus of a cornered animal. "Captain, above you." Naruto didn't need the warning. He looked up. Standing on the crossbeam of the main mast, a place that had been empty a second before, was the silencer. He was a specter of gray, featureless mask, a terrifying blank slate. He made no sound. His feet did not creak on the wood. The wind did not seem to touch his clothes. He was an absence, a hole in the world. Naruto pushed Shikamaru back. "Get below deck. This is my fight." The silencer dropped from the mast, not like a falling man, but like a stone, silent and heavy. He landed on the deck without a sound. He drew two short, black blades, their edges seeming to drink the light. Naruto's senses, his greatest weapon, were failing him. The closer the silencer got, the more his own energy field felt like it was dissolving into static. He couldn't feel the man's intent, his life force, his next move. It was like fighting a phantom. He created two shadow clones, and they charged, Rasengans blazing in their palms. The silencer moved. He didn't dodge. He flowed between them, his black blades flashing. The clones didn't explode in their usual puff of smoke. They simply ceased to exist. The Rasengans they held fizzled into nothingness before they could even connect. The silencer's ability wasn't just to be quiet. It was to negate, to nullify energy, chakra, haki, devil fruit powers. Naruto suspected it would all be useless against him. The real Naruto charged, foregoing his jutsu for pure taijutsu. He was a blur of motion, his fists and feet a golden storm. The silencer met him, his black blades not trying to cut, but to parry, to touch. Each time a blade came close, Naruto could feel the chakra in his own limbs weaken, the flow becoming sluggish. They were perfectly matched. Naruto's raw speed and power the silencer's impossible negation and precision. Their fight was a silent, deadly dance on the deck of the fog-shrouded ship. It was a battle of presence against absence, of life against the void. Naruto feinted a punch and spun into a kick, aiming for the man's masked head. The silencer ducked under it, his blade swiping for Naruto's ankle. Naruto recoiled, landing on the railing, breathing hard. This was impossible. Every one of his advantages was neutralized. The silencer tilted its masked head, a gesture of what might have been curiosity. It had the information it needed. It had seen his clones, his elemental manipulation, his raw physical prowess. Its mission was to observe, and the observation was complete. With a movement that was too fast to track, the silencer disengaged, ping from the railing and simply vanishing into the cloud sea below. Naruto stood on the deck, his heart pounding. The static in his senses cleared, the familiar hum of the world rushing back in. He was alone. Shikamaru emerged from below deck, his face grim. "What was that?" Valerius's answer. Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the spot where the assassin had disappeared. "He's found me. He knows what I am." The secret war was no longer in the shadows. It was on his doorstep. The final battle for Skypiea was a symphony of chaos. Luffy, swallowed by a giant snake, eventually found his way to Enel's golden arc, the maxim. What Enel hadn't counted on, in his divine arrogance, was a simple, elemental truth. Lightning has no effect on rubber. Their fight was titanic, a clash between a man who believed he was God and a boy who didn't care, a battle that raged across a dying sky island. It ended as it was always meant to. Luffy, his fist encased in a massive ball of solid gold, smashed into Enel with the force of a meteor, ringing the great golden bell of Shandora for the first time in 400 years. The sound rolled across the sky, a deep, resonant peal of victory and promise. It reached the ears of the old man cricket on Jaya below, proof that the city of gold was not a lie. It reached the ears of the Sky people and the Shandia, a declaration that their long war was over. And it reached Nami. She stood on the deck of the Mary, now laden with a fortune in gold, watching as the island began to descend from the sky, the ordeal over. The sound of the bell was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. It was the sound of a promise kept, of a dream made real. She looked out over the endless sea of clouds, her mind a whirlwind. She had faced a god and survived. She had seen a city of gold. And she had felt, more certain than ever, the presence of a guardian demon, a flash of gold who fought a silent war on her behalf. Who was he? What did he want? The questions burned in her. More pressing than any treasure, more mysterious than any sky island. She looked down at the blue sea below, and for the first time, she wasn't just thinking about the next island. She was inking about the man who would surely be waiting for her there, a paradox of justice and rebellion, a storm she was beginning to realize she had no desire to escape. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Admiral's Ice and the Captain's Choice. The descent from the sky was even more terrifying than the ascent. They rode an octopus-shaped balloon down through the clouds, a slow, agonizing fall that ended with a jarring splash into the familiar, comforting blue of the sea below. They had done it. They had sailed on a sea of clouds, looted a city of gold, and escaped with their lives and a new, impossible story to tell. The mood on the Going Merry was electric. They were rich, not just pirate rich, but kingdom rich. Piles of gold, jewels, and priceless artifacts were stashed below deck, enough to buy their own island. Usopp was already drawing up blueprints for a giant bronze statue of himself. Sanji was planning a lifetime's worth of gourmet meals. Luffy was just happy because the gold was shiny. Nami was in her element. She sat at her navigation table, surrounded by treasure, meticulously cataloging and appraising every last piece. This was the dream, the culmination of a lifetime of scrounging and stealing. But as she ran a hand over a golden chalice, the cold metal failed to bring its usual thrill. Her mind wasn't on the gold. It was on the clouds, on the impossible battle, and on the invisible hand that had tilted the scales in their favor. Her eyes drifted to Nico Robin, who was sitting on the deck, sketching the strange cloud formations in a leather-bound journal. The archaeologist had proven her worth in the sky, her calm intellect a steadying force in the chaos. But Nami's distrust hadn't vanished, it had simply changed shape. She wasn't worried Robin would betray them. She was worried about the world Robin had dragged them into. The world Naruto had warned her about. Something troubles you, Navigator-san? Robin asked, not looking up from her sketch. Just wondering what all this gold is going to attract. Nami replied, the lie coming easily. Robin's pencil paused. Treasure invites thieves, she said, her voice a soft murmur. But knowledge invites monsters. She finally looked up, her dark, knowing eyes meeting Nami's. The monsters are far more dangerous. Before Nami could press her, the ship jolted. They had made landfall. The island was long and thin, a series of grassy plains dotted with sparse trees and strangely tall animals. It was, for the first time in a long time, completely and utterly normal. And after a week in the sky, normal felt like a paradise. They found a single, nomadic settlement, a tribe of friendly people who lived a slow, pastoral life. They warned the Straw Hats about the island's only oddity, the ebb and flow, a massive tide that would recede for miles, leaving the land dry for 3 hours before rushing back in with ferocious speed. It was a local curiosity, a quirk of nature. For 2 days, the Straw Hats relaxed. They played with the tall horses, explored the empty plains, and let the trauma of Skypiea wash away. It was a brief, idyllic peace. A calm before a storm so cold it would threaten to freeze their very souls. The storm arrived on the 3rd day, in the form of a man on a bicycle. He rode across the surface of the sea, his wheels leaving a trail of ice in their wake. He was unnaturally tall, clad in a white suit and a blue shirt. A sleeping mask pushed up on his forehead. He coasted onto the shore with a lazy, almost bored indifference and parked his bicycle against a tree. Well, the man said, his voice a slow, relaxed drawl. Look what the tide washed in. The Straw Hat Pirates. The crew, who had been setting up a beach barbecue, froze. Zoro's hand went to his swords. Sanji dropped a slab of meat and moved to stand in front of Nami and Robin. Who the hell are you? Luffy demanded, his mouth full of half-cooked seafood. The tall man stretched, a series of loud cracks echoing from his back. Kuzan, he said with a yawn. But you can call me by my professional title. Marine Admiral Aokiji. The name fell like a block of ice in the warm afternoon sun. Admiral, one of the 3 wrongest fighters in the entire world government, a man whose power was said to be on par with that of a force of nature. This wasn't Smoker. This wasn't a captain with a grudge. This was the pinnacle of marine power. Standing on their beach like he was deciding what to have for lunch. What's an admiral doing all the way out here? Zoro asked, his voice a low growl, his grip on his swords tightening. Aokiji's lazy gaze drifted from one crew member to the next, finally settling on Nico Robin. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. I was in the neighborhood, tracking down some information. But then I heard a rather interesting rumor. That Nico Robin, the demon of Ohara, had found a new nest to hide in. Robin's serene composure finally broke. Her face went pale, a flicker of a deep, primal fear in her eyes that Nami had never seen before. You were there, Robin whispered, her voice trembling. At Ohara, you were the one who let you escape, Aokiji finished for her, his tone devoid of any emotion. Yep, a little favor for my old friend Jaguar D. Saul. But I told you then, didn't I? I'm not your ally, and if you ever became a threat again, I would be the first one to hunt you down. His gaze hardened, the lazy warmth vanishing, replaced by a glacial cold. You've joined a dangerous crew, Nico Robin. You're gathering allies. You're getting too close to the truth. The free ride is over. Luffy stepped forward, planting himself between the admiral and his crew. She's one of us now, he said simply, his voice flat and serious. If you want her, you have to go through me. Aokiji looked at Luffy, a flicker of something, pity, perhaps, in his eyes. I also have a debt to you, Monkey D. Luffy, you took care of Crocodile for us in Alabasta. We're grateful, so I'll make you a deal. Hand over Nico Robin, and I will let the rest of you sail away from this island unharmed. The offer was met with a resounding, unified silence of absolute refusal. Aokiji sighed, a plume of frosty air escaping his lips. I thought so. Such a pain. You kids and your loyalty. He plucked a blade of grass from the ground and tossed it into the air. It froze solid before it hit the ground, shattering like glass. In that case, I'll just have to eliminate all of you. He moved. He wasn't fast like Naruto. He was simply there. One moment he was by the tree, the next he was in front of Robin. His hand glowing with a chilling blue light. Ice Age. On the other side of the island, a cloaked marine frigate lay hidden in a deep, narrow bay. Naruto stood on the deck, his eyes closed. His senses spread across the landmass. He had felt the Straw Hats' relaxation, their brief moment of peace. And then he had felt the cold. It was an energy signature he knew well, a power so immense. Say it felt like a permanent hole in the world's natural temperature. It was the signature of an admiral. Shikamaru, he said, his voice tight. Report. Shikamaru was at a console, a frantic look on his face. It's Admiral Aokiji, sir. His battleship is anchored 10 miles to the north, but he's on the island. Unofficial visit. No mission log. He's moving under his own authority. Naruto's blood ran cold. This wasn't a coincidence. After the silencer's appearance, after Jiraiya's warning, this was a deliberate move. Valerius wasn't just sending his own assassins anymore. He was manipulating the system. He had pointed the world government's biggest gun right at the Straw Hats' heads. He's after Robin, Naruto breathed, the pieces clicking together. Of course, he's going to remove the key from the board. He could feel the confrontation on the beach, the spike of fear from the crew, Luffy's unwavering defiance. And then he felt Aokiji's power flare, a wave of absolute zero that threatened to extinguish the warm, familiar life forces he had been tracking for months. He was in an impossible position. To intervene, to fight an admiral, would be an act of open treason. He would be branded a traitor, hunted by the very organization he served. His ability to protect them from the shadows would be gone forever. But to do nothing, to stand here and let Aokiji annihilate them. He thought of Nami's defiant face on Enel's arc. He thought of her terror as the wax closed in. He thought of her sleeping, feverish brow under his hand. The mission, the conspiracies, his own past, none of it mattered. All hands, prepare for emergency maneuver, he roared, his voice cracking like a whip. Shikamaru, give me a real-time analysis of the island's tidal patterns. Now, he was not going to fight an admiral. He was going to fight the ocean itself. Sanji and Zoro charged, a flurry of kicks and a whirlwind of steel. Aokiji didn't even look at them. He touched the ground, and a wave of ice shot out, encasing both of them up to their necks in seconds, freezing them in place mid-attack. Room for a little growth, you two, the admiral commented idly. He turned his chilling gaze back to Robin. Luffy stretched his arm for a gum-gum pistol. Aokiji simply created a blade of ice in his hand and touched the rubbery limb. The ice spread instantly, covering Luffy's entire arm, rendering it stiff and useless. A word of advice, Aokiji said calmly. You can't win. He lunged for Robin, but this time, Luffy was there, his body a shield. Aokiji's icy hand plunged into Luffy's chest. Luffy, Nami screamed in horror. The ice spread, not just over his skin, but through him. In seconds, Monkey D. Luffy, the rubber man who was immune to so much, was frozen solid, a statue of defiance, his mouth open in a silent roar. Aokiji pulled his hand back, looking at his work. Rubber is still made of matter, and all matter freezes at a low enough temperature. He looked at the remaining, horrified crew members. Now, who's next? He raised a hand, preparing to shatter Luffy's frozen form, to end the threat of the Straw Hats for good. And that's when the island began to scream. A low, guttural rumble started deep within the earth. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a sound of immense pressure, of water being moved by an impossible force. The nomads on the plains began to shout in panic, pointing towards the sea. The tide, the ebb and flow, it was coming back, but this wasn't the fast-moving but predictable wave the locals had described. A wall of water, 100 meters high, was rising on the horizon. It was not a natural wave. It moved with a malevolent intelligence, a churning, roaring tsunami that was about to scour the entire island clean. Aokiji paused, his killing blow forgotten. He looked from the petrified pirates to the apocalyptic wave. Even for an admiral, this was a problem. He could save himself, easily. But his own battleship was in the wave's path. The local inhabitants would be wiped out. The collateral damage would be immense. TCH. What a pain, he grumbled, his priorities shifting in an instant. This was no longer an assassination. It was a natural disaster relief mission. Ice Age. He slammed both hands on the ground. A colossal wave of ice, far greater than anything he had used on the Straw Hats, surged out to meet the tsunami. The two forces of nature collided with a sound that was deafening, a war between water and cold. The ocean froze in a chaotic, jagged mountain range of ice, the tsunami stopped in its tracks. But the distraction was all the Straw Hats needed. Chopper, in his powerful human form, shattered the ice around Zoro and Sanji. Usopp and Nami, their faces masks of terrified determination, carefully lifted the frozen statue of their captain. They scrambled onto the Going Merry, Robin helping them, her face a blank canvas of shock and guilt. They set sail, navigating through the newly formed icebergs, escaping into the sea under the cover of Aokiji's epic battle with the ocean. Aokiji stood on the frozen shore, watching them go. He could have pursued, he could have frozen the entire sea. But he didn't. He had seen the wave. He was a man who understood the fundamental forces of the world, and that wave, it had felt wrong. It was too large, too sudden. It felt directed, as if the island itself had intervened to save the pirates. He let them go, a seed of doubt planted in his mind. Aboard the Swift Justice, Naruto collapsed to one knee, sweat beading on his brow, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had done it. He had gathered every ounce of his chakra, every bit of his control over the wind and water, and pulled the entire tide of the island back in a single, focused, cataclysmic wave. He had gambled that Aoki's sense of duty would outweigh his desire to kill a few pirates. And he had won. Shikamaru helped him to his feet. That was the most reckless, insane, and troublesome thing you have ever done, he said, a grin of pure, unadulterated respect on his face. Get us out of here, Naruto gasped, his voice hoarse. Before he starts asking questions. The cloaked frigate slipped away into the fog, leaving behind a frozen sea and a very confused admiral. Later that night, on the deck of the Going Merry, the crew worked frantically to thaw their captain, their mood grim and silent. Nami stood at the railing, staring out at the dark water. The gold below deck felt worthless. Their victory in the sky felt like a child's dream. Today, they had faced reality. And reality had almost killed them. But the wave, that impossible, life-saving wave, it wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a miracle. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, what it was. It was him. He hadn't just created a breeze this time. He hadn't just caused a rockslide. He had moved the ocean. The scale of his power was terrifying, something that rivaled the admiral they had just fled. And he had used that power to save them. To save her. Her fear of him was gone, replaced by a dizzying, terrifying mix of awe and a powerful, magnetic pull. He wasn't just a marine. He wasn't just a shadow. He was a force of nature in his own right. Her protector. Her enigma. And she knew, as she watched her frozen captain finally begin to thaw, that their next destination wasn't just the next island on the log pose. Their next destination was an inevitable collision with the man known as the Yellow Flash. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The City of Water and the Weight of Secrets. The sea between Long Land and their next destination was a quiet, wounded thing. The boisterous energy that usually filled the Going Merry was gone, replaced by a heavy, somber silence. Luffy, thawed and miraculously unharmed, wasn't perched on his usual seat on the figurehead. He sat on the deck, his straw hat pulled low over his eyes, staring at his own hands as if he didn't recognize them. He had been beaten, not in a fight, not in a contest of wills, but by a power so absolute it rendered his own meaningless. For the first time, the boundless ocean of his optimism had found a shore of harsh, cold reality. Robin was a ghost, moving silently about the ship, her smiles never reaching her eyes. She was the cause. She knew it. The weight of her past, the demon of Ohara, had finally caught up to them and nearly dragged them all into an icy grave. The crew didn't blame her. Their loyalty was too stubborn for that, but her guilt was a tangible presence, a shroud of sorrow that chilled the air more than any of Aokiji's ice. And the Merry was crying. Every swell of the waves was answered by a groan of tired wood, a creak of strained planks. The journey through the sky, the crash back to the sea, and the frantic escape through the ice had been too much. The little caravel that had been their home, their friend, was dying. Nami felt the ship's pain like it was her own. She was the navigator, and she was steering a broken vessel with a broken crew toward an uncertain future. She pored over her charts, her mind a whirlwind. The gold they had taken from Skypiea, a treasure that should have been a joyous victory, now felt like a curse. A heavy weight pulling them down. It was her job to fix this. To find a port, a shipwright, a way forward. Her log pose pointed them to one of the most famous cities in the Grand Line, Water 7, the City of Water. A metropolis of canals and bridges, home to the finest shipwrights in the world. It was a beacon of hope. But as she charted their course, her mind kept drifting away from the maps. Away from the broken ship, to the impossible wave. He had moved the ocean for them. Not for a mission, not for some grand strategy. He had done it to save them. To save her. The thought was a terrifying, exhilarating constant at the back of her mind. He was no longer a shadow, a paradox. He was a choice she didn't know how to make, a question she was terrified to ask. Their arrival at Water 7 was a breath of life. The city was a marvel, a testament to humanity's ability to defy the sea. Buildings rose from the water on stilts, connected by a web of canals and bridges. Gondolas, called Yagara bulls, zipped through the waterways, and the air was filled with the sounds of hammers, saws, and the joyous shouts of a vibrant city. For a brief moment, the crew's gloom lifted, replaced by a shared sense of wonder. Their first order of business was the gold. They needed to exchange it for berry to pay for the repairs. Luffy, Nami, and Usopp were tasked with the job, lugging heavy suitcases to the city's main bank. The sheer weight of 300 million berry was enough to rekindle a spark of excitement in Usopp and Luffy. But their renewed hope was short-lived. On their way back to the docks, they were ambushed by a bizarre crew of ship dismantlers who called themselves the Frankie family. In a chaotic, one-sided battle, the money was stolen, and Usopp, trying desperately to reclaim the funds that were meant to save their ship, was beaten to within an inch of his life. The crew found him later, a broken, bruised mess. And something inside Luffy snapped. He led Zoro, Sanji, and Chopper on a rampage, finding the Frankie house and utterly annihilating it, taking back their pride, but not their money. But the worst was yet to come. While they were gone, Nami had the Master Shipwrights of Galila Company inspect the Going Merry. The verdict, delivered by a man with a square nose named Kaku, was a death sentence. The keel, the ship's very spine, was irreparably damaged. The Going Merry could never sail again. The news shattered what was left of the crew's morale. For Usopp, who had received the ship as a gift from his beloved Kaya, it was a personal betrayal. When Luffy, with the heavy heart of a captain making an impossible choice, declared they would have to abandon the Merry and get a new ship, Usopp's grief turned to rage. The fight that followed was the most devastating blow the crew had ever suffered. It wasn't a battle of fists, but of words, each one a poisoned dagger. Usopp accused Luffy of being a heartless captain, of throwing away a member of their crew. Luffy, burdened by his duty to keep them all alive, roared back that he wouldn't steer them to their deaths on a sinking ship. The argument escalated, tearing at the very fabric of their friendship, until the final unforgivable words were spoken. Usopp challenged Luffy to a duel for ownership of the Merry. He was leaving the Straw Hat Pirates. That night, under a sky weeping with rain, the duel took place. Usopp, with his tricks and his wits, fought with a desperate bravery that earned him the respect of everyone watching. But he was fighting his captain. He was fighting Monkey D. Luffy. The outcome was never in doubt. The fight ended with a single, brutal punch. Luffy stood over his fallen friend, tears mixing with the rain on his face, a captain who had been forced to break his own heart for the sake of his crew. The Straw Hat Pirates were broken. In the churning, violent waters of the Aqua Laguna, the annual high tide that threatened to drown Water 7, the swift Justice lay hidden. It was anchored in a deep-sea cave, the raging storm outside masking its presence completely. Inside, the mood was as grim as the weather. Naruto sat cross-legged on the floor of his private quarters, his eyes closed. He was meditating, but not for peace. He was stretching his senses, trying to heal the spiritual exhaustion that came from moving an ocean. The backlash had been immense, leaving his chakra pathways strained and his connection to nature energy frayed. He had put a crack in the world, and it had cost him. Shikamaru entered the room, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond simple fatigue. "The city is a powder keg," he said, laying a map on the low table. "And our friends are the ones holding the match." He debriefed Naruto on the Straw Hat's misfortunes, the stolen money, Usopp's beating, the Merry's death sentence, and the heartbreaking duel. Naruto listened in silence, his fists clenching and unclenching. He had saved them from an admiral, only for them to tear themselves apart from the inside. "It gets worse," Shikamaru continued, his voice dropping. "The intelligence my clones have gathered is troublesome in the extreme. Cipher Pole number 9 is here. Embedded. They've been here for 5 years, posing as shipwrights and citizens." He pointed to names on the map. Rob Lucci, the ventriloquist shipwright. Kaku, the one who inspected their ship. Khalifa, the secretary. Bluno, the bartender. They're all here, and they're not just watching. Naruto's eyes snapped open, a cold, hard blue. "The Pluton blueprints." "Exactly," Shikamaru confirmed. "They've been trying to get them from the mayor and master shipwright, Iceberg. And now that Nico Robin, the only person who can read the poneglyphs and potentially find the actual weapon, has landed on their doorstep, they're making their move. They're going to frame the Straw Hats, take Robin, and disappear with the blueprints." The trap was perfect. The Straw Hats were weak, divided, and Ulrea Die seen as thugs after they demolished the Frankie house. No one would believe their innocence. And Valerius? Naruto asked, his voice a low growl. The silencer is still a ghost. But the timing of this is too perfect, Shikamaru said. CP9 is an official government agency, but their orders, they stink of the hand. This is Valerius, pulling the strings of the government itself, using their own secret police to achieve his goals. He wants Robin, and he's using Spandam and CP9 as his disposable tools. Naruto stood up, the weariness falling away from him, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fury. He had tried to be a ghost, a guardian. But the game had changed. The enemy was no longer a distant threat. They were a dagger at the throat of the woman he cared for. The time for subtlety was over. Nami stood on the highest bridge in Water 7, the wind whipping her hair, the raging aqua laguna a churning gray monster below. The city was in lockdown, preparing for the storm, but she barely noticed. Her world had already been ripped apart. Usopp was gone. Luffy was a shell. The Mary was a wreck. The family she had found, the one she would have died for, was fractured and bleeding. She felt so utterly helpless. She was a navigator. She could read the winds and the currents, but she couldn't navigate the broken hearts of her friends. She clutched the railing, the cold metal a poor substitute, for the warmth of the family she was losing. It's a heavy burden, isn't it? The voice was not a surprise. Not anymore. She turned, and he was there, standing a few feet away, the storm's wind doing little to stir his simple black coat. He looked tired. The usual, infuriating calm in his eyes was replaced by a deep, resonant weariness that mirrored her own. "What do you want, Naruto?" she asked, her voice flat, exhausted. She didn't have the energy for anger or suspicion. "I came to see if you were okay," he said simply. The honesty of it, the simple care in his voice, broke through her defenses. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "No," she whispered. "Nothing is okay. We're falling apart. Usopp. Luffy, it's all broken." He closed the distance between them, his presence a shield against the howling wind. "Things break," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Bonds, ships, hearts. It doesn't mean they can't be mended. It doesn't mean you stop fighting for them." "How?" she cried, looking up at him, her eyes pleading. "How do we fight this? We can't even fight for each other anymore." "You will," he said with a certainty that defied the chaos around them. "Because your captain, even when he's at his lowest, is stronger than you think. And so are you." He looked out at the raging sea. "But you have a more immediate problem. This city, it's a cage, Nami. It was designed to trap one of you." He told her everything. About CP9, their identities, their 5-year mission. He told her about the blueprints, about their plan to frame the Straw Hats for the coming assassination attempt on Iceberg. He laid the entire conspiracy bare. She stared at him, the scope of the betrayal, the sheer, cold-blooded patience of their enemies, sending a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the storm. How do you know all this?" He finally met her gaze, and the weariness in his eyes was overshadowed by a fierce, protective fire. "Because my war is not with your crew. It's with the people who pull the strings of men like them. The same people who want Nico Robin for what she knows." He took a half-step closer, the world seeming to shrink until it was only the two of them on that windswept bridge. "I told you I was helping you because of the mission," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "That was true. At first. In Alabasta, I saved you because it was necessary to stop Crocodile. On Skypiea, I saved you from Enel because you were a valuable asset." He paused, and the air crackled with a tension thicker than the coming storm. "But on Long Ring Longla, ND, when Aokiji froze your captain, I moved the ocean. I used a power that could have exposed me to the entire world, that could have gotten me executed for treason." He looked at her, his blue eyes raw and unguarded, stripped of all artifice. "And I didn't do it for a mission. I didn't do it for the world government or for my own secret war. I did it because I could not stand the thought of that ice touching you." The confession hung between them, a truth more powerful and terrifying than any storm. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, wild rhythm. This was it, the answer to the question she had been too afraid to ask. He wasn't her protector because of duty. He was her protector because of her. Her hand moved on its own, her fingers brushing against his. His skin was warm, a startling contrast to the cold wind. He didn't pull away. "This is going to get much worse before it gets better," he said, his voice regaining its steel. "CP9 will make their move tonight, during the storm. They will take Robin." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, smooth, black stone. It seemed to absorb the light around it, a piece of carved nothingness. He pressed it into her hand. "This is a chakra receiver," he explained. "My own invention. If you are ever in a place with no escape, if you are ever facing a darkness you cannot fight, crush it. It will shatter into dust, and I will know where you are. I will come." She looked from the stone to his face. It was a lifeline, a promise, but it was also a choice. To use it would be to accept his help, to tie her fate, and the fate of her crew, to his secret war. "Go to your friends, Nami," he said, his hand gently squeezing hers before letting go. "You are their heart. They are lost without you." He turned, and with a flicker of gold that was almost lost in the storm-darkened sky, he was gone. Nami stood alone on the bridge, the black stone a heavy, solid weight in her palm. The wind howled, the sea raged, and a new storm, one of assassins and conspiracies, was about to break over their heads. Her crew was broken, her ship was dying, and the man she was falling for was an enemy of the world. But for the first time in days, she didn't feel helpless. She felt a spark of her old, defiant fire. They had her friends cornered. They had her city under siege. They were about to find out what happened when you pushed a navigator too far. That night, just as Naruto predicted, CP9 made their move. The assassination attempt on Iceberg was made, and the Straw Hats were framed. Robin, in a desperate bid to save her new friends from the wrath of the world government, made a deal with the devil and surrendered herself. Nami found Luffy on the ruined deck of the Going Merry, staring out at the storm. She told him everything, about Robin's sacrifice, about the true enemy, and as she spoke, the broken look in her captain's eyes was replaced by a familiar, stubborn fire. The world had turned against them. Their crew was scattered. Their enemy was a shadowy legion of super assassins. But they had taken one of their own. And there was nothing in the heavens or on the earth that would stop the Straw Hats from getting her back. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Bridge of Hesitation. War came to water 7 not with the roar of cannons, but with the desperate gasps of a city drowning in its own secrets. The Aqua Laguna raged, a churning, angry manifestation of the chaos that had consumed the Straw Hat pirates. Their captain was emotionally shattered, their sniper was gone, their ship was a wreck, and their newest crewmate had surrendered herself to the world's most ruthless assassins to save them from a fate she believed she deserved. In the eye of this hurricane, Nami became the anchor. Armed with the terrible knowledge Naruto had given her, she found the remnants of her crew huddled in an evacuation shelter. She laid out the truth of CP9, of the 5-year deception, of Robin's sacrifice. She fanned the ying embers of their fighting spirit with the fuel of betrayal. "They took her," she said, her voice clear and hard above the storm, her gaze fixed on Luffy. "They took Robin. Are you just going to sit there and let them?" And in that moment, the captain returned. The fog of doubt and defeat in Luffy's eyes burned away, replaced by the simple, incandescent fire of his conviction. They had taken his friend. Nothing else mattered. Their path forward was a madman's dream, a charge into the heart of a government fortress during the worst storm of the century. Their vessel was not a proud galleon, but an unfinished, armored sea train with no brakes, the Rocket Man, built by the very man whose family they had just demolished. But Frankie, his own past intertwined with the specter of the ancient weapons, saw in their reckless loyalty a cause worth fighting for. An alliance was forged in the fires of shared desperation, uniting pirates, shipwrights, and the city's underworld in a single, suicidal charge against the world government. As the Rocket Man smashed its way through the storm-tossed waves, a new figure appeared among them, masked and caped, a hero of justice from the Island of Snipers. Sogeking had arrived, his aim true, his heart torn between the pride that had driven him away and the love that had pulled him back. The crew was not yet whole, but it was once again complete. Miles away, in the silent, pressurized calm of his submerged sea cave, Naruto Uzumaki opened his eyes. He had felt the shift. The scattered, flickering flames of the Straw Hats' life forces had converged, igniting into a single defiant bonfire that was now hurtling across the sea towards Enel's lobby. "They're on the move," Shikamaru stated, his voice flat. He stood before a tactical board, charting the storm currents and the known patrol routes around the judicial island. "It's a frontal assault. No subtlety, no strategy. Just pure, unadulterated, troublesome force of will. It's the only way he knows how to fight," Naruto said. Standing up, the strain of his last encounter was gone, replaced by a lethal, focused calm. He strapped a sheathed ninjutsu to his back and pulled on a simple black cloak. Its hood deep enough to shadow his face. "You can't go in with them," Shikamaru argued, though he knew it was pointless. Enel's lobby is the gateway to Marine HQ and Impel Down. It's crawling with vice admirals. If you're seen, if you're identified, it's over. Garp can't protect you from a buster call. "I won't be seen," Naruto said. He walked towards the cave's exit, where the churning green water of the Aqua Laguna waited. "My fight isn't with the Marines. It's with the shadows they're protecting." He looked back at his friend. "Keep the justice hidden. Monitor all government communications. And be ready to move. When this is over, we're going to have the eyes of the world on us." He didn't wait for a reply. He stepped into the raging water and vanished, a whisper of motion in a world of roaring chaos. He moved through the storm-tossed sea not as a swimmer, but as a part of the storm itself, his chakra molding the currents around him, propelling him forward at impossible speeds. He was a human torpedo. A ghost in the machine, heading for the heart of the enemy. Enel's lobby was not a fortress, it was a statement. A monument to the world government's absolute power, it stood defiant against the sea. A place from which no one returned. The Rocket Man did not dock. It crashed, plowing through the outer gates in a shower of steel and splintered wood, announcing the arrival of the Straw Hat Pirates with all the subtlety of a cannonball. They stood, a small, battered crew, before an army of 10,000 soldiers. And they did not flinch. They declared war. What full load was a battle that would become legend. Luffy, a rubber comet of fury, blasted a path through the main gates. Zoro became a three-sworded demon, Sanji a whirlwind of black-legged kicks. They were a force of nature, unstoppable. Their shared purpose making them more powerful than they had ever been. While their chaotic, glorious assault drew every eye, Naruto slipped over the sea-drenched walls of the island. A shadow born of the storm. The soldiers, the giants, the judicial officers, they were irrelevant, obstacles he flowed around without a sound. His senses were his guide, a map of life and energy. He could feel the 6 immense, predatory signatures of CP9 in the Tower of Justice. He could feel the terrified, flickering candle of Robin's life. And he could feel the cold spot. The void. The silencer was here, waiting. Valerius had not been fooled by the storm. He knew this was the nexus, the point where all his plans would either converge or collapse. And he had placed his Queen Killer on the board. Naruto moved through the Tower of Justice like a phantom, his path a silent, deadly parallel to the Straw Hat's roaring rampage. He saw Zoro engage the giraffe-like Kaku, Sanji K off his own explosive culinary battle with Jabra. He felt Chopper, in his monstrous, uncontrollable form, tearing a path of destruction. They were holding their own. They were fighting their own battles. His purpose was not to interfere with them, but to clear the path to the final confrontation. He found his first target in a long, ornate hallway. Khalifa, the sole female member of CP9, was Grak. Fully floating towards the sounds of battle, ready to intercept any pirate who broke through the main lines. Naruto dropped from the ceiling in front of her, a silent, hooded figure. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice calm. Her body shifting into a combat stance. "You're not one of the pirates." Naruto didn't answer. He raised a single hand, his fingers forming a seal. Wind style. Pressure damage. The air in the hallway around Khalifa instantly compressed, becoming as heavy as deep seawater. She gasped, her knees buckling, her powerful Rokushiki techniques useless against an enemy she couldn't even touch. She was pinned to the floor by the very air she was trying to breathe. Naruto walked past her paralyzed form without a second glance. He had no time for protracted fights. He was a scalpel, excising the cancers one by one. He continued his ascent, a silent guardian angel of death, until he reached the balconies and bridges that connected the Tower of Justice to the Gates of Justice. And there, he saw it. The heartbreaking tableau that would define this war. Nico Robin stood on one side, her face a mask of resigned despair, flanked by the smug, pathetic figure of Spandam and the towering, impassive form of Rob Lucci. On the other side of a great chasm, having fought his way through an army, stood Luffy. The moment was intimate, a conversation screamed across a battlefield. Luffy didn't care about her past, about the danger she brought. She was his friend, and he had come to take her back. Robin, he yelled, his voice raw with emotion. I haven't heard it from your own mouth. Say you want to live. The words struck Robin with the force of a physical blow. Her lifetime of running, of being told her very existence was a sin, of believing she was a burden to everyone she ever loved, it all came crashing down. The dam of her composure broke, and for the first time, she let herself feel the one thing she had always been denied: hope. Tears streaming down her face, a cry of pure, unadulterated longing was torn from her soul. I want to live. It was a declaration of war. Spandam, in his arrogance, ordered his men to shoot down the Straw Hat flag, the symbol of their defiance. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Luffy ordered Sogeking to return the favor. The flag of the world government, the symbol of absolute global authority, was set ablaze. The Straw Hat pirates had just, literally, declared war on the entire world. For one friend. As the battle was joined, Nami found herself cornered on a narrow stone bridge. She had been separated from the group, trying to find a way to cut off the other CP9 agents. Now, she was the one who had been cut off. Khalifa, having recovered from Naruto's pressure trap, stood before her, her eyes burning with cold fury. You pirates and your filthy emotional bonds, Khalifa hissed, her body blurring as she used Soru, appearing directly in front of Nami. I'll cleanse you from this island myself. Nami fought back with her Klima tact, using mirages and gusts of wind, but she was outclassed. Khalifa's Rokushiki was too fast, her attacks too powerful. A finger pistol grazed Nami's shoulder, a sharp, stabbing pain. She stumbled back, cornered against the railing, the churning, angry sea hundreds of feet below. This was it, a place with no escape, a darkness she could not fight. Her hand, trembling, went to the small pouch at her belt. She pulled out the smooth, black stone Naruto had given her. It felt cool and solid in her palm, a stark contrast to the terror that was threatening to consume her. Is that a devil fruit? Khalifa sneered. It won't save you. Nami looked at the advancing assassin, then at the stone. It was a choice, a final admission that she could not win this alone. A final acceptance of the bond that had grown between her and the ghost who haunted her journey. She squeezed her fist, her knuckles white. She crushed the stone. It didn't explode. It didn't flash. It simply disintegrated into a fine, black dust that was instantly snatched away by the wind. For a second, nothing happened. Khalifa laughed, a cold, mocking sound. How pathetic. She lunged, her fingers extended like a spear, aiming for Nami's heart. Flicker. He was there, not with a bang, but with a whisper. One moment, Khalifa's attack was a heartbeat from its target. The next, a figure in a black, hooded cloak was standing between them. Naruto hadn't moved through space, he had simply arrived, a silent, absolute negation of Khalifa's attack. He caught her extended wrist in his hand, his grip like steel. Khalifa's eyes widened in shock. She tried to pull back, but she couldn't move. She couldn't even feel her own arm anymore. You talk too much, Naruto said, his voice a low, chilling whisper from the depths of his hood. He didn't punch her. He didn't throw her. He simply pushed. A small, controlled burst of chakra, a precise strike to the nerve cluster in her arm. Khalifa's eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed. Unconscious. The entire confrontation had taken less than a second. He turned to Nami. The raging battle, the crumbling fortress, the war against the world, it all faded into a silent, focused point. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of orange hair from her face, his touch a stark contrast to the lethal efficiency he had just displayed. I told you I would come, he said. His voice no longer the cold whisper of an assassin, but the warm, familiar tone that had haunted her dreams. She couldn't speak. She could only nod, her eyes wide, her heart a wild, chaotic drum. He had come. He had kept his promise. In the heart of her darkest moment, her impossible, golden-haired demon had appeared. "The fight for Robin is yours," he said, pressing a small, metallic cylinder into her hand. It was a piece of her Klima tact, but it hummed with a faint, blue energy. "A little upgrade. Use it well." He stepped back, his gaze lifting, looking towards the highest spire of the tower, where he could feel a familiar, chilling void. "I have my own monster to face." He was about to leave when she finally found her voice. "Naruto." He paused, turning back slightly. "Thank you," she said, the words carrying the weight of 100 saved lives, of 1,000 unspoken feelings. From beneath the shadow of his hood, she saw him smile. A genuine, warm smile. And then, with a flicker of gold, he was gone. Nami stood on the bridge, the unconscious form of her enemy at her feet, a new, powerful weapon in her hand, and a heart that was no longer just a pirate's or a navigator's. It was a heart that had finally, irrevocably, chosen its own true north. Naruto reappeared on the highest roof of the Tower of Justice, his cloak whipping in the wind. The silencer was there, waiting for him. A gray statue against the bruised, stormy sky. The void he projected was stronger now, more absolute. "You've caused enough chaos, anomaly," the silencer said, its voice a synthesized, toneless hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Grand Inquisitor Valerius has decreed your existence an error. It is time for you to be deleted." Naruto pulled the ninjutsu from his back, its blade singing in the wind. He let his cloak fall away, revealing his simple black attire, his brilliant blonde hair a beacon in the gloom. The time for hiding was over. "Your god is a tyrant," Naruto said, his blue eyes blazing with a power that had nothing to do with the Marines or this world. "And I don't kneel to tyrants." Below, his friends, her friends, waged a war against the world for the sake of one person's life. And above, on the roof of that dying world, Naruto Uzumaki prepared to fight a war for all of them. The two battles had become one. Chapter 10 End.